Chapter 539. Seeing that Li Yundong was speaking confidently, Rong Jun couldn't help but sneer and say, "You killed Mr. Shun, and you're still so stubborn. I'd like to see how you can turn this muddy root into a fresh lotus seed of the West Lake." Everyone also looked at Li Yundong with complicated eyes, full of suspicion, mockery and disdain. Go to the internet. Even the third concubine and Shun Hui looked at Li Yundong in panic. The look in their eyes showed that they didn't believe Li Yundong's words at all. Only Su Chan knew that Li Yundong had just quietly revealed his transcendental cultivation of magic. In the history of China, Zhang Buoduan, one of the 5 ancestors of Taoism in the Northern Song dynasty, and the founder of the Xiang sect, once made an appointment with a monk to travel to Yangzhou. The two of them made an appointment to leave their bodies and go to Yangzhou to enjoy Qionghua. After their souls left their bodies in an instant, they returned at the same time after a while. The monk talked about the scene of Qionghua he had seen. When he asked Zhang Buoduan smiled and said nothing. He took out a Qionghua he had picked from his sleeve. The monk was shocked and felt ashamed of Zhang Buoduan's magic cultivation. He asked Zhang Buoduan how he had done it. Zhang Buoduan said with a smile, "I cultivate both life and death, so I cultivate a yang spirit body, which can touch real things. However, you only cultivate your nature and don't cultivate your life, so you cultivate a yin spirit, which can't touch real things." In front of him, Li Yundong used the power of yang spirit to fly to the West Lake in an instant. However, because it was winter, there were no lotus flowers on the surface of the lake, let alone lotus seeds. Therefore, he flew to the bottom of the West Lake and took a piece of lotus root. At this time, Li Yundong was already at the top level of yang spirit. He could change it at will, and everything was natural. If he wanted to turn this lotus root into a lotus seed, it was just a matter of thinking. Seeing that everyone was suspicious, he didn't get angry. He just smiled slightly, put his hand into the water basin again, and buried the lotus root in the water. He quickly mobilized the purest yuanyang qi in his body and poured it into the lotus root. Everything began in spring. The reason why life grew was because of the yang qi that gradually grew in spring. Although there was a lot of yang qi in the world, it was sparse and thin. How could it compare to the purest yang qi that was accumulated in the dantian of a cultivator? As soon as Li Yundong's wisp of supreme yang qi between heaven and earth entered the lotus root, it immediately stimulated the lotus root, which had not yet lost its vitality, to grow and develop rapidly. At first, there was no movement, but soon, the lotus root in the basin slowly grew roots and rhizomes. Then they grew longer and longer, and in the blink of an eye, lotus roots and leaves grew out of the basin. Everyone was dumbfounded. Their mouths were wide open, and their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. But what was even more shocking was that after the lotus leaves grew, the basin was soon covered with a layer of green lotus leaves. The leaves were so green that it made people feel as if they were in a warm spring, not the cold winter they were in right now. Not long after, everyone saw a pink and fresh lotus flower quickly emerge from the lotus leaves. Then, the lotus flower grew at a speed visible to the naked eye, swaying and growing bigger and bigger. At first, it was only the size of a little finger, delicate and tender, but it suddenly became the size of a fist, ready to bloom. Before the crowd could even exclaim in surprise, they saw the lotus suddenly bloom. The petals peeled off layer by layer, revealing a green and bright lotus plate in the middle. The lotus plate was dotted with lotus seeds, clearly visible, like drops of crystal clear water droplets gathered on the surface. At this time, Li Yundong turned his wrist and took off the lotus plate. He held it in front of everyone and said with a smile, "How about it? I said that it is a fresh West Lake lotus seed, so it is a fresh West Lake lotus seed, right?" Only then did everyone come to their senses and let out a burst of shocked exclamation. "Oh my God, did I see it wrong? Is this magic? How can anyone in the world do such magic? Didn't you hear what Mr. Shin said before? It's an immortal skill, an immortal skill. Then is this guy an immortal? Isn't it too exaggerated?" There were also some people like Rong Jun who still didn't believe it. He said loudly, "Is this lotus seed real or fake? Li Yundong handed the lotus plate to the third concubine with a smile and said, "Go and pick the lotus seeds. Mash them and give them to Mr. Shen to eat." The third concubine was so excited that she trembled all over. At this time, she saw Li Yundong's miracle. Only then did she understand why Shen Wankai admired this young man so much, and even said that he knew immortal skills. Regardless of his family's opposition, he invited him to the banquet. The third concubine had already regarded Li Yundong as a god. In her heart, she believed that a person like Li Yundong, who was like a god, could definitely save Shen Wankai. She immediately held the lotus plate with both hands and said to Shen Hui with a trembling body, "Come on, come with me to peel the lotus seeds." Although Shen Hui had seen Li Yundong's amazing magic skills several times, she had never been as shocked as she was now. She suddenly realized that her father wanted her to worship this young man as her master. But now was not the time to let her imagination run wild. Shen Hui quickly calmed down and followed her mother into the kitchen. Not long after, the two of them came out quickly with a bowl in their hands. Shen Hui held a porcelain bowl with both hands, as if there was the Jindan divine liquid of the Jade Emperor in the bowl. The third concubine beside her stared straight at the Westlake lotus seeds that had been mashed in the bowl. Her expression seemed as if she couldn't wait to snatch a bite. Not only her, but most of the people in the room couldn't help but have the same thought when they saw Li Yundong's divine skills. The Westlake lotus seeds must be extraordinary. Although they can't live 100 years after eating them, they can at least prolong their lives and improve their beauty and health care, right? Shen Hui poured the mashed lotus seeds into Shen Wankai's mouth bit by bit. After only 2 mouthfuls, Shen Wankai suddenly trembled. He spat out all the lotus seed soup in his mouth and shouted, "It's so bitter, so bitter." Everyone saw that as soon as the lotus seeds went down, Shen Wankai, who seemed to be dead just now, came back to life. They suddenly widened their eyes and exclaimed, "He's alive! He's alive!" The third concubine and Shen Hui immediately hugged each other and cried with joy. Li Xiaoxian and Shen Yu looked at each other in horror at the same time, and they were trembling with fear. Li Xiaoxian's thoughts raced like lightning. She immediately burst into tears and threw herself on Shen Wansai's body. She cried loudly, "Old Shen, you scared me to death. Fortunately, you're fine. You have to prove my innocence." Li Yundong saw that Li Xiaoxian's tears had come out of nowhere. Her acting skills were so exquisite that many movie stars in the film and television industry would feel inferior to her and die. He couldn't help but admire her in his heart. Seeing that Shen Wankai had finally woken up, Yin Mingfan couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. She put her palms together and said, "Thank God. Ba, I was really scared to death. Li Yundong, I thought you couldn't save her. The last time I saw you, you saved Yin Mingfan in a few moves. Why is it so troublesome this time?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "Mr. Chow is young, and his body is just a leaking body. His qi and blood are not weak. It's just that because of the sudden incident, his qi and blood can't be supplied, which leads to his life being in danger. I used the massage technique to bring out the vigorous qi and blood in her body, so I could save her immediately. But Mr. Shen is in his 60s. His body is already weak, and his qi and blood are very weak. If I also use the massage technique to adjust his little qi, even if I save him for a while, in the end, I will harm him. Before long, he will lose all his qi and blood and die of exhaustion of qi. Therefore, I have to use the dragon liver and phoenix gall to nourish his qi, and then use the fresh lotus seeds of Westlake full of yang qi to strengthen his yang qi. Therefore, not only did I save him at this time, I dare say that Mr. Shen also has 10 more years of life because of this." As he spoke, Li Yundong suddenly turned his head and said to Rong Jun, who had been making things difficult for him, with a smile, "Child Rong, I said that this is the dragon liver and phoenix gall, and I said that this is the lotus seeds of Westlake. What do you think? Are they?" If Li Yundong had said these words more than 10 minutes ago, no one here would have believed him except Su Chan. But just now, he had conjured a lotus root from nothing in the water basin, and then turned the rotten into the magical, turning the lotus root into lotus seeds. How could anyone dare not believe such an amazing divine skill in front of them? No matter how unconvinced Rong Jun was, how could he dare to say no? At this time, everyone was treating Li Yundong like a god. Some of the older distinguished guests rushed to Li Yundong like a tide, regardless of their status, and shouted, "Child Li, no, immortal Li, do you still have dragon liver, phoenix gall, and Westlake lotus seeds? Can you give them to me?" No, I'll pay a lot of money for them. You can ask for as much as you want." For a moment, there was a hubbub of voices in the hall, and Li Yundong was surrounded. Shen Wangkai, who had just woken up, was confused. He looked around, patted Li Xiaoxian on the back, and motioned for her to get up. Then he raised his hand and said to the third concubine, "What's going on? What happened?" The third concubine took Shen Wansai's hand and stood up. She cried and said with a smile, "Thank God, old master, you're finally alive. You have to thank this living immortal." Seeing that the old man had come back to life, Shen Hui, who was standing to one side, seemed to have returned to the sun and regained her former cleverness. She quickly explained what had happened just now, but because she was worried about the old man's health, she obediently omitted the part about her mother and Li Xiaoxian scheming against each other. Shen Wangkai was silent for a long time and did not speak. The third concubine saw that Shen Wansai's face was ruddy, and he didn't look like he had almost died of illness just now. She glanced at the lotus seeds of Westlake next to her and said eagerly, "Old Shen, how did it taste when you ate the fresh lotus seeds of Westlake just now? Is it that bitter?" Shen Wangkai only glanced at the third concubine and knew what she was thinking. He wanted to glare at her and scold, "Do you even want to rob my medicine?" But when Shen Wansai's eyes swept over Li Jiandong, who was not far away, he suddenly thought of something. He pushed the bowl in front of the third concubine and said with a smile, "You stood up to the crowd and saved my life. I'll give this to you." The third concubine was so excited that her whole body trembled. As if she was afraid that Shen Wangkai would go back on his word, she immediately took the bowl into her arms and didn't even let the people next to her look at it. At this time, everyone's eyes were red with envy. They thought to themselves, just now, Shen Wangkai was like a dead corpse. As a result, he only ate 2 or 3 mouthfuls of this lotus seed and immediately came back to life. It can be seen that this lotus seed can bring people back to life and death. If he eats a bowl of it, won't he become an immortal? The third concubine was stared at by everyone. She immediately stood up vigilantly, found an excuse and ran upstairs. At first, she just walked dignified like a noble lady, but after taking a few steps, she finally couldn't help running away like a refugee fleeing from a famine. The third concubine rushed into her room and gulped it down. As she ate, she cried and shouted. Her voice kept coming from the room. "It's so bitter! It's so bitter!" At this time, Su Chong couldn't help laughing out loud. These people didn't understand the key, but she knew it well. The real elixir was the most inconspicuous 9 turns jade dew pill. Without the 9 turns jade dew pill to nourish Shen Wansai's qi and blood, no matter how many lotus seeds there were, they would not be able to save him. But everyone only believed what they saw with their own eyes. When they saw Shen Wangkai eat the lotus seeds of Westlake and immediately wake up, they thought that the lotus seeds of Westlake were elixirs, so they all regarded them as peerless treasures. However, the little girl would not remind everyone of this. Moreover, she knew that it would be useless to say it. She just looked at Li Yundong with admiration and thought to herself, "That's right. A person with great ability like Li Yundong should be respected wherever he goes. He shouldn't be despised and bullied wherever he goes, or even framed." Seeing that everyone was respectful to Li Yundong, the little girl was secretly proud. Li Yundong seemed to know what she was thinking. He smiled and stretched out his hand to scratch the little girl's nose. Su Chong giggled and made a face at Li Yundong. The two of them were being intimate, as if there was no one else around. At this time, Shen Wangkai walked up to Li Yundong, sighed softly and said, "Child Li, I can't thank you enough for your kindness. I don't know if I can talk to you in private. I have a few private words to say to you." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Okay." Shen Wangkai chuckled and said, "Then let's go upstairs and talk." Li Xiaoxian and Shen Yu, who were standing to one side, saw that Shen Wankai had woken up and was ignoring them. With a guilty conscience, they became more and more uneasy and frightened. Li Shaoxian couldn't help shouting, "Old Shen." But Shen Wankai didn't even look back. He went upstairs with Li Yundong, leaving Li Shaoxian trembling in panic. After entering the room, as soon as Shen Wankai closed the door, he immediately knelt down in front of Li Yundong and said respectfully, "Child Li, I know that you are a living immortal. You don't have to hide it. Please accept me as your disciple." First published in Chinese. Chapter 540. Li Yundong hadn't expected that Shen Wankai would ask him to be his master after surviving the disaster. He was stunned for a moment, then immediately helped Shen Wankai up and said with a smile, "Mr. Shen, what are you doing? Get up, get up." Shen Wankai said shamelessly, "Immortally, if you don't agree, I won't get up." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hadn't expected that Shen Wankai, who was so respected and old, would be so shameless. Watch net. 7K. OM. He lifted Shen Wankai up again with both hands and said, "Mr. Shen, if you have something to say, we can talk it out. Why do you have to do this? If you have any difficulties, tell me. I will try my best to help you. Don't make it like this." Shen Wankai seemed to have expected that Li Yundong would not accept him as a disciple. He smiled bitterly to himself, sighed and said, "People say that when they are about to die, they will always open their heavenly eyes and see what has happened in their lives. They will instantly understand what they couldn't understand before. Today, I took a turn at the gates of hell, and I truly understood this sentence." Shen Wankai sighed and said, "At the moment of my death, my heart was as clear as a mirror. Young Master Li, you must be a living immortal. There must be immortals in this world, right? If that wasn't the case, how could you have saved me?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and said, "Mr. Shen, you are too extreme. I don't know if there are immortals in this world, but I know that I am definitely not one. As for how I saved you, it was actually a very scientific medical method." Seeing that Li Yundong refused to admit it, Shen Wankai couldn't help but say anxiously, "Scientific medical treatment? You can make fresh Westlake lotus seeds appear out of thin air in this cold winter. How is this scientific? Moreover, I heard from Xiaowei that you gave me an ordinary elixir, and I got better. If this isn't the means of an immortal, then what is it?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Mr. Shen, as I told you before, Gu Hong said that there are all kinds of strange things in this world, let alone immortals. At the same time, he also said that the gods in this world could not become gods through cultivation, but immortals could become immortals through cultivation. Cultivation was a very scientific thing in this world. Its theory was based on the scientific theory of traditional Chinese medicine. Therefore, what saved you was traditional Chinese medicine, not some magical magic. As for the Westlake lotus seed, it's just a small trick, not worth mentioning." Shen Wankai quickly asked, "Then how did you learn this cultivation? Can I learn it?" Li Yundong hesitated for a moment and said seriously, "Anyone can cultivate. It's just a matter of cultivation level." Shen Wankai no longer hesitated and knelt down again. "Immortal Li, you must accept me as your disciple." Li Yundong immediately stopped him again and said with a wry smile, "Mr. Shen, why do you want me to accept you as my disciple?" Shen Wankai said seriously, "I want to learn the art of cultivation." Li Yundong asked, "Mr. Shen, have you ever thought about why you want to learn the art of cultivation?" Shen Wankai thought for a moment and said, "I want to become an immortal." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Mr. Shen, you must be joking. If you want to become an immortal, I won't accept you as my disciple, because you are now in a declining body. It's too late for you to cultivate. It's impossible for you to become an immortal. If you cultivate with this idea in mind, if you can't achieve your goal in the future, you will resent me." Shen Wankai hurriedly said, No, immortally, I actually want to live forever. I can live for more than 100 years, and Peng Zhu and Qingqing's father-in-law can live for 800 years. It was still ancient times. Why can't I?" Seeing Chen Wansai's excited and serious face, Li Yundong nodded slightly and said seriously, "Mr. Shen, Don't be in a hurry to become my disciple. Listen to a story first. Only then did Chen Wankai calm down a little. He said, Immortally tell me. Li Yundong smiled and said, Mr. Shen, do you know Wang Chongyang? Chen Wankai laughed and said, Immortally, you look down on people too much. Who doesn't know Wang Chongyang? Even if he hasn't been to school, he must have read Jin Yang's books. It's a medium Shentong. Li Yundong smiled and said, Mr. Shen, just call me Li Yundong. You don't have to call me immortally. I'm not an immortal. Chen Wankai had to change the way he addressed him, but he didn't want to call him by his name. He still said respectfully, Child Li, go ahead. I'm listening. Li Yundong said. After Wang Chongyang founded the Chuanjin sect, he met Ma Yu, who was rich at that time. Ma Yu wanted to be his disciple, but Ma Yu was old at this time, and he couldn't let go of his huge family property and his wife and children, so he was hesitant. In the end, Wang Chongyang used a lot of magical powers to enlighten him, which made him wake up and give up his huge family property. At the same time, he and his wife, Sun Buer, became Wang Chongyang's disciples. That's how the Northern Seven of the Chuanjin sect came into being. As Chen Wankai listened to Li Yundong's words, he suddenly thought of something and thought to himself, what does Child Li mean by telling me this story? Is he hinting at something? Li Yundong saw that Chen Wankai's eyes were thoughtful, so he knew that Chen Wankai must have thought that he had ulterior motives for saying this. He explained with a smile, Mr. Shen, I'm telling you this story not because I want you to hint at something, but because I want to tell you that if you want to cultivate, you have to cultivate wholeheartedly, especially for someone like you who wants to live forever. Chen Wankai was stunned. He blurted out, Child Li, do you mean that I should give up my family property? Li Yundong shook his head and said, Mr. Shen, what I mean is that you must have a quiet and peaceful cultivation environment and a firm will to cultivate. Otherwise, you will only bring disaster upon yourself. It's definitely not a good thing. Chen Wankai was anxious. Then what do I have to do to make you accept me as your disciple? Li Yundong smiled and said, Mr. Shen, you are a smart person. You will naturally understand in the future. I can't tell you now. However, in your current situation, I won't accept you as my disciple. Chen Wankai saw that although Li Yundong's face was full of smiles, there was an unquestionable determination in his voice. He couldn't help but be disappointed. However, Chen Wankai was an experienced businessman after all. Although he was unhappy, he still forced a smile and said, In that case, I won't force you. Child Li, if you change your mind, you must tell me. Li Yundong chuckled and said, The decision is not in my hands but in yours. Chen Wankai's heart skipped a beat, and he thought to himself, Is Child Li hinting at me to pay a huge fee to be his disciple? Li Yundong only glanced at him and knew that Chen Wankai was thinking about something else. He smiled slightly and didn't say anything. He walked to the door, opened it and said, I'll leave first, Mr. Shen. Think about it yourself. Chen Wankai was in a low mood. He hummed and lowered his head full of doubts. In his opinion, it was absolutely impossible to spend all his family's wealth to become Li Yundong's disciple. Not to mention other things, what about his big family? Shen Yu was a good-for-nothing, and Shen Hui was not a person who could take charge of things alone. Who would hand over such a big family business to? What about the 4 wives? Could it be that he would take them to be Li Yundong's disciples like Ma Yu? What kind of joke was this? He was already annoyed to death by their scheming. If they all joined the same sect, wouldn't he be able to live? Chen Wansai's mind was running wild. After a long time, he came down from the main building. He glanced around the hall, but he couldn't see Li Yundong and Su Chan. He couldn't help but be surprised. Where is Child Li? Shen Hui said curiously. He left. We just went out to send him off. I also asked him why you didn't come. He said you were thinking about something in your room. I thought you knew. Chen Wankai stamped his feet and said, Damn it, Child Li must be angry with me. I haven't repaid him for saving my life yet. Hurry up and get him back. Steward Zhang, who was standing to one side, immediately responded and ran out quickly. But not long after, he ran back panting and said, Old master, I can't see him anymore. Chen Wankai said regretfully, It's my fault. I've neglected the distinguished guest. The third concubine beside him smiled and said, Old master, don't worry. Anyway, you know where Childly lives. You can visit him in person another day and give him a generous gift, right? Chen Wankai looked out the door and let out a long sigh. That's true, but to give a generous gift, how generous is it? After Li Yundong and Su Chan left the Shen family, the little girl asked in confusion, Yundong, why did you leave without having fun at the banquet? Li Yundong shook his head and said, Chen Wankai didn't force me to accept Shen Yu and Shen Hui as my disciples this time. In the end, he accepted me as his master himself. Do you think I should accept him? Su Chan's eyes lit up and she said happily, Yes, it's great to have such a rich disciple. However, Li Yundong shook his head and said, No, if you accept a disciple, you have to be responsible for him. Moreover, he wants to cultivate to be immortal. You are also a cultivator. And you know that if you want to cultivate to the realm of immortality, you must cultivate to the Jinshin phase. How many people have been able to cultivate to this level since ancient times? Chen Wankai has a weak body. It's already very disadvantageous for him to cultivate at an old age. Not to mention that he has such a big family business now. He has countless mundane affairs to deal with all day long. Only then did Su Chan understand a little. She let out a cry and said, Yes, I understand. His wives are fighting very fiercely, and his son and daughter are also troublesome. He can't calm down to cultivate at all. If he cultivates in such a state, he will definitely be possessed by the devil. Li Yundong nodded and said, That's right. I told him the story of Wang Chongyang, the leader of the Chuanjin sect, taking Ma Yu as his disciple. I don't know if he can understand. Su Chan sighed and said, Alas, that's a pity. I thought I could accept a rich disciple and live a carefree life from now on. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and pinched the little girl's nose. Don't be silly. If you want to live a carefree life, you just need to manage our Desanxian well. Counting on others is never as good as counting on yourself. Su Chan clapped her hands and said in surprise, Oh, Desanxian hasn't opened for a few days. We've lost a lot of money. Li Yundong chuckled and said, Well, we can open tomorrow. You'd better obediently be the lady boss. Su Chan said with some embarrassment, I've caused such a big trouble. I can't be the proprietress anymore. Li Yundong said curiously, I'm the owner of this shop. Are you sure you don't want to be the proprietress? Only then did Su Chan come to her senses. She hugged Li Yundong tightly and said nervously, Yes, yes, I must be the proprietress. Li Yundong laughed and patted the little girl's head. Silly girl, let's go home. The little girl snuggled up to Li Yundong and smelled his strong masculine scent. Her heart gradually calmed down. She followed Li Yundong quietly for a while and thought to herself, Yundong is so good to me. Why should I hide something from him? But master wants me not to tell him. Why is she doing this? The little girl was confused all the way, and Li Yundong didn't know what she was thinking. On their way home, Li Yundong's cell phone suddenly rang in his pocket. Li Yundong took out his cell phone and said with a smile, I almost forgot that I had a cell phone. I wonder who's calling me. He glanced at it and saw that it was Feng Na's phone number. Li Yundong asked curiously, Why did this guy call me today? As soon as Li Yundong picked up the phone, he heard an anxious voice ring out. Li Yundong, it's terrible. Help. Previous chapter table of contents. Next chapter recommendation. Previous page. Return to table of contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 541. As soon as Li Yundong received Feng Na's call, he was shocked and asked, Feng Na? What's wrong? What happened? Feng Na said in an exaggerated voice, Oh, someone's dead. Come to the school quickly. Li Yundong thought that something serious had happened, so he quickly asked, What happened? Don't worry, tell me slowly. Feng Na said quickly, You'll know when you get here. I'm waiting for you to save me. After that, there was a busy tone from the other end of the phone. Go to Kanban. 7K. Li Yundong frowned and turned to look at Su Chan. Did you hear that? The little girl nodded and asked worriedly, what happened? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, I don't know, but Feng Na said it was very serious. Should we go and have a look immediately? But TSK, this guy didn't tell us where she is at school. How can we find her? Su Chan thought for a moment and said, let's go there first. Maybe it's really urgent. If it's something like a shooting, we can't delay it. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, then let's just fly there? Su Chan looked around and saw that although the high-end community they were in was gorgeous and rich, it was located in the suburbs of the city and was relatively remote. Occasionally, she could only see a few luxury cars passing by, and there was almost no one on the road. Su Chan nodded and said, well, we can go back to school for dinner. I haven't been back for a long time. Li Yundong sighed slightly and said, yes, it's been a long time. Let's go. Although I've only been away from school for more than a month, it feels like I haven't been back for centuries. By the way, I haven't been to school for so long. I don't know if the school will expel me. Su Chan snorted and said, that's their loss. Li Yundong chuckled. In the past, he had valued his education and degree very much. The reason was that he could receive more relief money from his parents if he continued his studies. But now, Li Yundong was a person who had opened a tea house, and there were many rich businessmen who wanted to give him money. How could he still care about money now? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, let's go. There's no time to lose. Let's go back and have a look. Seeing that there was no one around, the two of them quickly rose into the air and flew in the direction of Tian'an University. After flying to the school, in order to save time, Su Chan used the goddess Nyan seal to cover their figures and descended from the sky. Su Chan looked around at the familiar surroundings of the campus. It was already late at night, and many students were shuttling through the tree-lined paths on the campus to study in the academic buildings. There were also many men and women in pairs, hugging and cuddling. Under the moonlight, there were still many playful students playing football on the field, forgetting to eat and sleep. It was a lively scene. The little girl couldn't help but sigh. He still hasn't changed. Such a familiar feeling. But it doesn't seem like something serious has happened. Li Yundong also felt a little strange. But when he glanced around, he saw a familiar figure flash by not far away. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on it and saw a round-faced beauty in a purple dress carrying 2 plastic bags in her hands. The plastic bags were piled with all kinds of snacks. Wearing an MP3 player in her ear, she was listening to music and humming a little tune, walking leisurely towards the academic building. Who else could it be if it wasn't Feng Na, who had been so anxious before? Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other. The little girl opened her mouth wide and said, we can't be fooled, can we? Why does Feng Na look like she's going on a picnic? Li Yundong was also a little surprised. He couldn't help but say, I think so too. But judging from her previous experience of plotting against me, I'm afraid this time is another one. Li Yundong remembered that he had been set up by Feng Na several times before. She had either used him in speeches or begged him to speak on the stage as a student representative. As a result, he had always made a fool of himself. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He said, forget it. This girl likes to act first and report later. Let's go and see what she's up to. The two of them walked behind Feng Na invisibly, but Feng Na didn't know what they were doing. She carried 2 bags of snacks and walked into the academic building. When she went up to the 3rd floor and entered a classroom, she was immediately greeted by a big-breasted beauty. It was Feng Na's best friend Cheng Cheng. Cheng Cheng exclaimed as if she had seen a bodhisattva who had come to her rescue. Wow, there's so much food! After she exclaimed, another exclamation came from the side. A blond boy pounced on her like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey, shouting, oh my god, there's finally food! Then, a girl with brown hair and blue eyes followed him and said in a stiff Chinese accent, thank God I'm starving. Li Yundong was stunned when he saw the two of them. Su Chan couldn't help but ask curiously, Yundong, aren't they the 2 people who want to be your apprentices? Why are they here? Li Yundong also felt a little strange. Why were John and Alba here? But he pinched Su Chan's soft hand and motioned for her not to speak. The classroom was empty except for Feng Na, Cheng Cheng, Chris, John and Alba. The slightest movement would be particularly ear-piercing. The two of them silently followed Feng Na into the classroom and stood behind her quietly, listening to their conversation. Feng Na was speechless as she watched the two bags in her hands being snatched away by the two of them. She shook her head and turned to Chris, who was relatively reserved, and said, "Can you guys stop robbing me? Why do you look like you've been starving for a few days?" Chris smiled and didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Have you contacted Li Yundong? Where does he live?" Feng Na smiled proudly and said, "I've called him over." John, who was eating Oreos, was shocked. Regardless of the food in his mouth, he exclaimed loudly, "What? You've already called Master over? Oh my God, I haven't finished eating yet." Feng Na laughed and said, "Are you surprised? Don't worry, eat slowly. I think it will take him a while to get here. And he doesn't know where we are." Cheng Cheng nudged her with her elbow and said, "Hey Nana, it's a little unkind of you to lie to Li Yundong like this." Feng Na snorted disapprovingly. She also tore open a bag of Wang Zai steamed buns and said, "I'm unkind? I don't know who's unkind. It's fine if he doesn't even go to class, right? The problem is that he doesn't even log on to QQ. Yesterday, he went to Desengxian and closed his shop. What the hell is he doing? Is he playing the evaporation secret order? If I didn't use this method, would this elusive hero appear?" Cheng Cheng thought for a moment and nodded. "That's right." At this time, John was concentrating on destroying the food, but he saw that Alba had already wolfed down the food. He couldn't help but say in English, "Hey Alba, pay attention to your image." Alba was fighting with a bag of potato chips. She grabbed a handful of chips and stuffed them into her mouth as she said, "What does it matter? Anyway, I'm representing the image of Chinese people now." John scolded with a smile. "Be careful not to let Master hear this, or he will definitely be angry. Besides, you just got a temporary residence permit. Weren't you always against the idea of becoming a Chinese?" Alba ate a little quickly and swallowed so much that her eyes rolled back. Chris, who was beside her, handed her a bottle of Coke with a speechless face. Alba quickly drank a few mouthfuls and patted her chest hard. Then she gasped and said, "John, you're wrong. I actually have a secret that I haven't told you." John asked curiously, "What secret?" Alba said seriously, "Actually, I've always felt that I was a Chinese in my previous life." John couldn't help but laugh. "Don't be funny, Alba. A few days ago, you said that this was an uncivilized and barbaric country." Alba was exposed by John, but she was not annoyed. She curled her lips and said, "You know, sometimes mysterious and barbaric are synonymous." Feng Na's English was good, but she couldn't help but be confused when she heard the conversation between the two of them. She said to John, "John, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand? Are you going to live in China for a long time?" John said excitedly, "Not only that, I've also applied for a transfer to Tiannan University. In the future, I will settle down in this country and marry a Chinese woman. What do you think? Isn't it cool?" Feng Na became more and more surprised. She opened her mouth and said, "Ah, you want to transfer from the world-class University of Pennsylvania to Tiannan University? Are you crazy?" No, why did you suddenly make such a decision?" Hardedef knew what Feng Na was trying to say, but he didn't mind. He made a few moves like he would in a kung fu movie and said mysteriously, "I want to be Li Yundong's disciple and be a Superman who saves the world." Feng Na looked at him with a strange expression. "I can understand if you want to take Li Yundong as your master, but saving the world? Are you kidding me?" John snorted and kept posing. He said, "Just like Superman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the Hulk." Feng Na finally couldn't stand John's exaggerated Western style. She said to Chris with a broken face, "Are you sure that your companion is not crazy?" Although she had also been hungry for a long time before eating, Chris still ate very reservedly, maintaining the demeanor of a lady from a noble family. She held a biscuit in one hand and a biscuit in the other, taking small bites as she said unhurriedly, "He's always been like this. You'll know when you get used to it. Feng Na shook her head and said, Chris, you suddenly came to me to ask about Li Yundong's whereabouts. I helped you find him. That's fine, but we're friends after all, aren't we? You can't not tell me some gossip, can you? Gossip. Although Chris's Chinese was good, she was at a loss for such a rare word. Feng Na explained, it means some inside information. Chris suddenly understood and said, John and I decided to come to China to be apprenticed. Then Alba heard about it and decided to come with us. However, when we met Li Yundong, he said that he would not accept us unless we became Chinese citizens. Otherwise, he would not accept us as disciples. So, we've been busy with this matter for the past few days. Today, we ran all day and didn't even have anything to eat. Feng Na was tongue-tied and said, in order to be apprenticed, you actually changed your nationality? Alba immediately said, yes, it's a very excessive request, isn't it? John immediately glared at her and said, be careful not to be heard by Master. Alba waved her hand disapprovingly and said, how could he possibly hear us? John said very seriously, Master is not an ordinary person. What if he can hear voices thousands of meters away? Alba thought of all the magical scenes she had seen, and couldn't help but change her expression. She immediately covered her mouth and said carefully, then can I take back my words now? Cheng Cheng, who had been silent and focused on eating, couldn't help but interrupt and say to Feng Na in Chinese, Nana, you bully me because my Chinese is not good. What are you muttering in bird language? Feng Na smiled bitterly and told Cheng Cheng what she had just said. Cheng Cheng said in surprise, so that's why you're looking for Li Yundong. I thought it was something important. Li Yundong is amazing. Foreigners are actually lining up to be apprenticed to him? John said to Feng Na worriedly. Feng, do you think Master will come? I'm afraid that he will hide from us if he hears that we are here. Feng Na waved her hand and said with a smile, if I go out, I can do it alone. One phone call, and I'm sure he will come. Chris asked curiously, do you have such a good relationship with him? Feng Na smiled proudly and said, of course. The fighting friendship of the revolutionary class is not a joke. If I ask him to come, he will definitely come immediately. What does it mean to be a sworn brother? This is it. John was overjoyed. Then Feng, can you ask Master to accept us as his disciples? Feng Na asked curiously, haven't you already called him Master? John said with some embarrassment, he hasn't agreed yet. But he soon said seriously, but in my heart he is my master. I must take him as my master. When Feng Na heard this, she was instantly amused. It turned out that this guy was just like her, a person who liked to act first and report later. John put his palms together and looked at Feng Na, as if he was praying to God and Buddha. Feng, you have such a good relationship with Master. Please help us beg him. We really want to be apprenticed to him. Chris put down the things in her hands and looked at Feng Na seriously. She said, yes, Feng Na, if you can really say something, please say something for her. Feng Na felt very proud. She waved her hand casually and said, okay, leave it to me. If I ask, Li Yundong will definitely agree. Just as she finished speaking, she heard a snort behind her, dragging out the tone and saying, oh, is that really the case? As soon as Feng Na and the others heard the voice, their bodies stiffened. Their gazes turned in unison to look behind Feng Na, and the temperature in the classroom plummeted. Frost seemed to form in the air. A tall, handsome boy was staring at them with a faint smile. Who else could it be but Li Yundong? Feng Na and the others froze when they heard the voice. Just type dash to see the published chapter content. Chapter 542. Feng Na and the others stared at Li Yundong in disbelief. Li Yundong was standing behind them with a faint smile on his face. Su Chan looked at Feng Na sympathetically and made an expression that said, I want to help, but I can't. Go to the internet. Feng Na was so shocked that she suddenly jumped up, her eyes almost popping out of her sockets. She stammered, why are you here? Are you a ghost? Not only Feng Na, but Chris, John, and Cheng Cheng were also so frightened that they fell to the ground. Alba, who was eating, was so frightened that she swallowed her food and rolled her eyes. She patted her chest loudly and finally recovered. She immediately turned to John and said, God, is he still human? When did he appear here? How long has he been here? Li Yundong put on a straight face and deliberately pretended to be very angry. He walked to the snack bag in front of Feng Na and took a bag of snacks. As he tore it open, he said leisurely, I'm not an ordinary person. What's so strange about suddenly appearing here? Feng Na said tongue-tied, But, I didn't see you just now. Were you hiding in this classroom? No, that's not right. If you were, I should have heard your phone ringing in your voice. John suddenly shouted excitedly, I know. Master must have suddenly appeared like he did on the boat last time. Just like a Japanese ninja. John's eyes lit up and he said to Li Yundong, Isn't that right, Master? Li Yundong didn't want to argue with them on this issue. He coughed dryly, ate the snacks, and said to Feng Na with a meaningful smile, I seem to have heard someone using my name to act first and report later. Sure enough, Feng Na and the others were changed by Li Yundong. She smiled awkwardly and quickly apologized, saying, You're so annoying. Can't you see that I'm joking? Besides, it's okay for friends to help each other, right? Cheng Chung also chimed in, That's right, Li Yundong. Chris and John are so sincere that they came all the way to China to ask you to be their apprentice. It's such a glorious thing. Why didn't you agree? Li Yundong smiled, glanced at the two of them and said, Don't worry about this. I know what I'm doing. Cheng Chung had always been a righteous and outspoken person. She couldn't help but want to speak again, but Feng Na immediately pulled her back. Feng Na laughed and said, All right, we don't care. However, they came all the way here. You have to give them an explanation, right? At this time, the shrewd Chris immediately stood up and said respectfully, Master, we've already done what you asked us to do, but it might take some time. Li Yundong was a little surprised. He hadn't expected that the other party would really change his nationality, just because he had said it casually. However, he couldn't change his words immediately. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After thinking for a while, he decided to delay and said, Let's talk about it later. Chris said with some disappointment, But I don't know when that will happen. Li Yundong smiled and said, Don't worry. Haste makes waste. If God really wants you to cultivate, he will arrange everything. Chris and John looked at each other, and Chris said sadly, It's just as I expected. He won't agree. Hardadef said in a low voice, Does Master think that we are not sincere enough? His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately said to Li Yundong excitedly, Master, in the past few days, in order to adapt to my new identity and new nationality, I did something earth-shattering. Although Li Yundong felt that Hardadef's master was a little harsh, he still asked curiously, Oh, what earth-shattering event? Did you hold a press conference to announce your new identity? Hardadef waved his hand and said with a big smile, No, I gave myself an awe-inspiring China name. Li Yundong said with a smile, What name? How awe-inspiring is it? Su Chan also came over and reached out to take food from the snack bag in Li Yundong's hand. As she ate, she blinked at Hardadef and asked curiously, Yes, what's your name? Hardadef said proudly, You all know this name. It will definitely make you feel refreshed and refreshed. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Not bad, Hardadef. You even know how to use idioms. It seems that I can't teach you how to greet people in the future. Hardadef chuckled and said, Master, can you guess what Chinese name I gave myself? Li Yundong scolded him with a smile. Don't always call me master. I'm not your master. Hurry up and tell me. Don't spoil my appetite. Only then did Hardadef wave his arm and say word by word proudly, The Chinese name I gave myself is Mao Zedong. Dong. Even though Li Yundong's cultivation was profound and his willpower was strong, when he suddenly heard this name, he almost couldn't breathe and almost rolled his eyes. If a top young spirit master like him were choked to death, it would really be the biggest joke in the past 5,000 years. Feng Na was drinking Coke when she suddenly heard Hardadef's words. She immediately spat it out and sprayed Cheng Cheng's face all over. Su Chan laughed so hard that she bent over and rubbed her stomach hard. Seeing Li Yundong and the others react so strongly, Hardadef suddenly said with a blank face, What's wrong? Isn't this name good? Li Yundong came back to his senses. He held back his laughter and said, "Well, of course it's a good name, but you can't use it." Hardadef asked anxiously, "Why not?" At this time, Feng Na helped Cheng Cheng wipe the coke off her body and explained, "This is the name of the founding leader of our country. You can't use it." Hardadef said curiously, "But there are also many people in our country who use the name Washington. What does it matter?" Cheng Cheng, who had been sprayed all over by Feng Na, said angrily, "If you can't use it, then you can't. Don't you know that the national conditions are different? Anyway, you can't use the names of national leaders." Hardadef couldn't help but mutter, "I hate totalitarian politics." But soon, his eyes lit up again and he said, "Then how about I call it People's Commune?" At this time, no matter how angry Ching Chung was, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. No, this name is too strange," Hardadef said with some disappointment. "This also won't work? Then, call it the Great Leap Forward?" Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. "Hardadef, why do you always hate the words of the old era? Can't you choose something that keeps up with the times?" Hardadef clapped his hands and said proudly, "Then let's call it Reform and Opening Up." At this time, Li Yundong finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. Su Chan laughed so hard that she almost turned into a gourd covering her mouth and rolled on the ground. Hardadef saw that Li Yundong and the others were laughing so hard that they were out of breath. Feng Na and Cheng Cheng were laughing so hard that they almost died. He said with confusion, "Why? Isn't this name good? This name keeps up with the times." Feng Na rubbed her belly and said with a smile, "Hardadef, if you really want to be a Chinese, you can't give yourself a random name. You have to choose a surname first, and then a given name. Isn't that how you choose your own names?" Hardadef scratched his messy blonde hair and said, "My father directly gave me my grandfather's name. There's no need to be so particular." At this time, Chris couldn't help but say with a smile, "Hardadef, Chinese people are very particular about choosing names, and there's even the knowledge of feng shui in it." Li Yundong glanced at Chris in surprise. "You know how to do this?" Chris smiled slightly and said in a reserved manner, "I know a little. I heard my grandmother talk about this. She said that in the past, when Chinese people chose their names, they would first calculate their birth date, and then calculate their fate based on their birth date. Then, according to what they lacked in their life, they would give the corresponding name to make up for it. Is that right?" Li Yundong immediately looked at Chris in a new light. He nodded and praised her. "Not bad, you know this. It's rare and commendable." Hardadef said to Chris curiously, "Chris, then tell me what I lack in my life, and what name should I give myself?" Chris said helplessly, "I don't know this. This is something that only people who understand the Book of Changes know." Li Yundong said with a smile, "It's good that you know these things." Hardadef looked at Li Yundong eagerly and said, "Master, please help me take a look." Li Yundong smiled, patted Su Chan on the shoulder next to him, and said, "You can ask her. She's an expert." At this time, Su Chan held back her laughter and said to Hardadef with a smile, "Do you want to have a Chinese name? Then you have to choose a surname first. Then you can give it a name." Hardadef asked, "What surnames do you have?" Su Chan counted with her fingers and said, "There are many. There are more than 100 surnames in China, and almost every surname has its own origin and story." Hardadef was shocked. "So many? Then I'll have the same surname as Master." Su Chan turned to look at Li Yundong. Seeing that he didn't mind, she said with a smile, "Your surname is Li?" "Zhao Qian's son. Li. These are the surnames ranked fourth among the 100 surnames, and they are also the surnames of the emperor. Not bad. However, if you want to calculate your fate based on the 8 characters of your birth, you have to tell me the specific year and month first." Hardadef said, "I was born in May 1990 AD. Su Chan counted with her fingers and said, "That's the year of the Jinggu Gingxinyu. What's the specific date and time?" Hardadef told her the time. Su Chan calculated again and said, "Ah, your fate is full of fire, and the 5 elements lack wood, so you have to find a way to add some wood to your name." Hardadef had been confused before. Although he could understand every word Su Chan had said, He didn't know what it meant when they were put together. However, when he heard that he had to add wood, he immediately understood and said happily, "Then my name is Li Mu." Chung Chung smiled maliciously and said, "You might as well be called Shan Mu." Feng Na burst into laughter and glared at Chung Chung. "Don't talk nonsense. You can't make jokes like this." Chung Chung laughed in a low voice and said, "He's already wood enough. What kind of wood would he be if he added wood?" As they spoke, both of them giggled. Hardadef didn't know what they were talking about, so he just smiled foolishly. Su Chan said with a smile, "Is there a word for wood in your name? Are you sure? You know, the more we Chinese lack something in the 5 elements, the more this word appears in our names. For example, if you lack wood, you can call yourself Lin, because there are 2 words for wood." Hardadef immediately said, "Then my name is Li Lin. Just call yourself Li Lin Lin." Chung Chung couldn't help but tease him. "But there are 3 words for wood in a forest. Isn't that more?" Hardadef immediately said, "Then my name is Li Sun Sun." Feng Na and Chung Chung laughed. "What a strange name." Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. "Forget it, don't tease him. Li Sun Sun feels gloomy. Let's call him Li Senator, it's pretty good." Hardadef was overjoyed. "Li Sun. Okay, I like it. Haha, I have a Chinese name." Chris couldn't help but ask curiously, "Can I have one?" Su Chan said with a smile, "Of course. Have you thought about what your surname is?" Chris thought for a moment and said, "My grandmother's surname is Lin, so I'll take it." Su Chan nodded. "Okay, what about your date of birth?" Chris quickly told Su Chan her date of birth. Su Chan calculated with her fingers and said with a smile, "You are born with a prosperous earth element and lack of water in the 5 elements." Chris reacted very quickly. "Then should I be named Lin Miao?" Su Chan clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Lin Miao? Good name, not bad." Although Alba had studied Chinese for a while after coming to China, she could only watch Chris, Hardadef, and Li Yundong speak Chinese. How could she understand a few words? She felt like she was listening to a book from heaven. She was angry and anxious in her heart. She gritted her teeth and thought, "Hardadef, this bastard, must have deliberately spoken Chinese. Damn it." Alba couldn't help but say, "Can someone tell me what you are laughing at?" Feng Na was closer to Chris. She smiled and explained what had just happened. "Chris and Hardadef both have Chinese names. Do you want one?" Alba couldn't help but be happy and said, "Can I do it too?" Okay. Then she quickly told her date of birth. Feng Na smiled and translated Alba's words to Su Chan. Su Chan calculated with her fingers and suddenly froze. She turned to Li Yundong and said, "Yundong, her birth chart is a little strange." Li Yundong also silently calculated with his fingers. He was also slightly stunned and couldn't help but look at Alba in surprise. When Alba saw that Su Chan and Li Yundong were looking at her strangely, she couldn't help but feel anxious. She tentatively said in stiff Chinese, "What's wrong?" Su Chan said to Alba doubtfully, "Your birth chart is very strange. All 5 elements are flourishing, and your yin qi is extremely heavy. It's really strange." Feng Na translated Alba's words, but Alba still asked curiously, "5 elements? What is it? What does it mean to have too much yin qi?" Feng Na frowned. It was really difficult to translate these words. She reluctantly translated, "The 5 elements are the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Too much yin qi means, well, it means that there is too little yang qi in your body, and too much yin qi." Alba listened with her eyes wide open. "What is yang qi?" Feng Na's back was sweating as she explained. She didn't know how to translate the word, but she quickly had an idea. She pointed to the sky and said, "It means the sun and the moon. Yang qi corresponds to the former, and yin qi corresponds to the latter." At this time, Hardadef also asked curiously, "Alba, your yin qi is so heavy. What do you lack in your life?" Alba was confused at this time, but she didn't want to lose face in front of everyone. She thought to herself, "This person said that I lack yang qi. Doesn't that mean I lack a sun?" She clapped her hands and said loudly in stiff Chinese, "I know." Everyone was stunned and looked at her. Alba was proud of herself. She shook her head and said, "I lack a sun in my life." Previous chapter contents. Next chapter recommendation. Previous page. Return to contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 543. Alba's words almost made Li Yundong, Feng Na, and Ching Ching burst out laughing. Su Chan was shaking with laughter, and even Chris's face was flushed, as if she wanted to laugh but was too embarrassed to do so. Go to the internet. 7K. OM. Only Alba looked at the crowd in confusion and said helplessly in English, "What's wrong? Did I say something wrong?" Chris's face turned red and she whispered to Alba, "You said something wrong." In Chinese. Alba's face suddenly turned red, and she muttered in embarrassment, F***ck, damn Chinese. Didn't this man just tell me that it means the sun? Chris held back her laughter and said, "A Chinese word often has many different meanings, especially in different contexts." Alba couldn't help but cover her face and sigh. "I don't think I'll be able to learn Chinese well for the rest of my life." Li Yundong held back his laughter and said, "Alba, your birth destiny is really strange. I've never heard of anyone who lacks nothing in the 5 elements but yang." Feng Na, who was standing to one side, also managed to hold back her laughter and translated for Alba. Alba asked curiously, "Is that good or bad?" Li Yundong smiled faintly. "There are both benefits and drawbacks. The advantage is that your birth destiny is very good and very suitable for cultivation. It can be said that you are born to cultivate, because your talent in the 5 elements is very evenly distributed. But even also means mediocrity. There is no one particularly outstanding, so it is possible for you to become a mediocre cultivator." After listening to Feng Na's translation, Alba asked blankly, "So?" Su Chan couldn't help but rush to explain. "So, you either become a very powerful cultivator who is proficient in all 5 elements magic, or you become a mediocre cultivator who achieves nothing." Alba couldn't help laughing out loud, looking extremely proud. Su Chan was stunned. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "Is she okay? What's so funny?" Alba patted Hardadef on the shoulder and said proudly, "Hardadef, did you hear that? She said that I might become a great person. My talent is even better than yours." Hardadef's heart was full of envy, jealousy and hatred. He said viciously, "Don't just pick out the pleasant ones. She also said that you might become a mediocre cultivator and achieve nothing." Alba waved her hand carelessly and said, "A genius like me must be the former, not the latter." Hardadef snorted and was about to speak when Li Yundong said with a smile, "Anyway, if you want a Chinese name, I suggest you choose a surname first." Alba thought for a moment and said, "Which surname ranks first in China?" Feng Na smiled and said, "Zhao Qian." Suddenly, the surname Zhao ranks first. Alba immediately said, "Then my surname will be Zhao." Hearing this, Cheng Ching couldn't help but laugh again. She whispered in Feng Na's ear, "Hey, her life is short of sun, and her surname is Zhao. Looking for a date. It really suits her fate." Feng Na couldn't help but burst into laughter. She quickly restrained her smile and glared at her. "Don't talk nonsense. Be friendly to foreign friends." Li Yundong also heard Cheng Cheng's words. He held back his laughter and said, "Then I'll call you Zhao Jing." "Zhao Jing, Zhao Jing." Alba repeated the name twice and said with a strange expression on her face, "It feels a little hard to pronounce. But..." Soon, the exotic beauty with a strong South American flavor smiled and said, "But I like it very much." As she spoke, she stepped forward to hug Li Yundong and give him a warm kiss. Li Yundong was quick to react. He immediately took a step back without batting an eyelid. Su Chan, who was standing beside him, stood in front of him and looked at him with an unfriendly gaze. Alba smiled embarrassedly and said, "I just want to express my gratitude, nothing else. But well, I know that Chinese people are conservative. Forget it." Li Yundong turned to Feng Na and said, "Did you trick me into coming here to give them names?" Feng Na smiled awkwardly. Just as she was about to speak, she heard a boy's voice coming from outside. Feng Na, you're here. I've been looking for you for a long time. As soon as the boy entered the classroom and saw Li Yundong, he was stunned and immediately frowned. Li Yundong looked over and saw that the boy was carrying a school bag and holding a book in his hand. His eyebrows were full of pride and conceit. Who else could it be but Yanhua? As soon as Yanhua saw Li Yundong, he immediately felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. He pretended not to see Li Yundong and didn't enter the classroom. Instead, he said to Feng Na, Feng Na, what did you want to talk to me about this afternoon? I just went to the student union to look for you, but I didn't know you were here. Someone said that they saw you here, so I came looking for you. Feng Na knew that there was a grudge between Yanfang and Li Yundong. She didn't want to embarrass Li Yundong, so she quickly walked out of the classroom and said, some of the new students want to join the student union, and there are 3 foreign friends who want to transfer to our school and join the student union. Yanhua was very utilitarian. As the vice president of the student union, he suddenly heard that there were 3 foreigners who wanted to join the student union. He suddenly became a little excited. Really? This is a good thing. We can make a big promotion. When the time comes, both of us will be proud. This shows that our student union has made some achievements. Our previous publicity work has not been in vain. Of course, this also shows that the status and image of Tiannan University has been improved. There are actually foreigners who want to study here and take the initiative to join the student union. Feng Na coughed dryly and said, they are not here for Tiannan University. They are exchange students who came to participate in the exchange of foreign universities last year. Yanhua was even more surprised. Is it the University of Pennsylvania? Feng Na nodded. She looked back at Li Yundong, pointed at him, and said, well, the 3 of them came back to find Li Yundong to be their teacher, so they decided to settle down in China and go to school. In the past, the 3 of them were the backbone of the student union, so when in Rome, do as the Romans do. They came to me and wanted to join the student union. Yanhua felt very upset when he heard this. He glanced at Li Yundong and saw that no matter where this boy went, he was like a sun emitting irresistible light. No matter who stood next to him, they would be overshadowed by his light. What made him especially jealous was that these foreigners had actually asked to join the student union because of Li Yundong's entrance into Tiannan University. He had thought that he had contributed to this, but in the end, it was all because of Li Yundong's face. If this could be tolerated, what could be tolerated? Yanhua felt as if there were countless ants gnawing at his heart. He tried hard not to show it, but his emotions had faded a lot. He forced a smile and said, I see. I will get it done when I come back next Monday. If you don't have anything else to do, I'll go home first. Feng Na didn't know what Yanhua was thinking. She smiled and said, well, see you on Monday. Yanhua snorted in his heart and finally glanced at Li Yundong with hatred. He gritted his teeth and said in his heart, if it weren't for this guy, I would be the most popular person in this school. Yanhua cursed angrily all the way home. When he got home and locked himself in his room, he punched the wall heavily, making a muffled bang. He couldn't help but roar in a low voice. Why doesn't this guy die? Why can't I become stronger and surpass him? Do you want to become stronger? Suddenly, a woman's voice came from Yanhua's room. Yanhua was startled and immediately turned his head to look. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening. After Yanhua entered the room, he didn't turn on the light. There was a person standing quietly beside his bedroom window. This person's back was against the moonlight, and her figure was slim and curvy. Her appearance couldn't be seen clearly, but it could still be seen that she was a very charming woman. Yanfang asked warily, who are you? As he spoke, he quickly turned on the light in the bedroom. But when he turned on the light, he was stunned. Aunt. This person was Yanfang. After Yanfang escaped from Li Yundong, the power of her yang spirit had been greatly reduced, so her cultivation quotient had dropped from the Yangshan phase to the Yin phase. Yanfang wanted to find a host with excellent talent and cultivate again in an attempt to make a comeback. But after looking around, she didn't find a suitable host. On the contrary, Her cultivation quotient of spiritual energy was declining every day, and her Jinqi was flowing away every day. As time passed, Yanfang felt in pain. She felt that the world was so big, but she had nowhere to go. There was no place she could settle down. In her grief and pain, she returned to her home. But not long after she came back, she heard Yanhua roaring in pain in her room. Yanfang's heart skipped a beat, and she couldn't help but show up and ask. But when she saw Yanhua suddenly look at her, she was stunned and asked again, "Do you want to become stronger?" Yanhua didn't understand why his aunt, who had always been elusive, had suddenly appeared in his room. Moreover, the strangest thing was that when Yanhua looked at Yanfang's body, he felt that he could see the wall behind her through her body, as if her body was transparent. After hearing Yanfang's second question, Yanhua seemed to have woken up from a dream and said, "Aunt, how did you become like this? You seem to." Yanfang looked at herself, smiled bitterly and said, "I don't look like a human, and I don't look like a ghost, do I?" Yanhua subconsciously wanted to nod, but he quickly reacted and said awkwardly, "Aunt, what happened?" Yanfang thought about how she had been lurking in the Fox Zen school for 9 years, but in the end she had failed. She couldn't help feeling sad and angry. She sneered and said, "You won't understand even if I tell you. I just want to ask you, do you want to become stronger?" Yanhua remembered that he had seen some of Yanfang's means before. His eyes suddenly lit up and he said, "Aunt, you are willing to teach me Kung Fu?" Previous chapter contents. Next chapter recommendation. Previous page. Return to contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 544. Yanfang nodded slowly. She walked up to Yanhua and looked him up and down seriously. She thought to herself, although Yanhua's aptitude is not as good as that of Li Yundong and Zhou Qin, he can be regarded as a superior. Moreover, he has the body of a 7 treasures and a virgin body. With my body, I believe that in a few days, he will also have a certain cultivation quotient. Humph! Li Yundong can make Zhou Qin so outstanding, can't I teach a master? Yanhua said excitedly. Aunt, I knew you were not an ordinary person. Li Yundong is not an ordinary person either. Is he? He has also learned your martial arts, hasn't he? Are you really a sword immortal? Yanhua asked a series of questions, but Yanfang did not answer. She focused on Yanhua's bones and facial features, and from time to time reached out to pinch the joints of his limbs and major acupoints. Watch net. 7K. OM. Seeing that Yanfang did not answer, Yanhua was not disappointed. Instead, he became more excited and asked, Aunt, am I talented and have good bones? Yanfang nodded slightly. Not bad. In Yanhua's impression, his aunt was a very serious person. She had almost never smiled, let alone taken the initiative to praise someone. When he saw that Yanfang was praising him, he was overjoyed and said, Aunt, can I beat Li Yundong? Yanfang was stunned for a moment, but she quickly sneered and said, You? Compared to Li Yundong, you are far inferior. Yanhua was a little disappointed, but he quickly cheered up and said, It doesn't matter. He started cultivating earlier than me, so it's normal for him to be stronger than me. But Auntie, you will definitely teach me more powerful martial arts and make me more powerful than him, right? Yanfang was too straightforward and never knew how to beat around the bush. She couldn't help but sneer and say, Although your talent is good, it's impossible for you to catch up with Li Yundong. Thinking of Li Yundong's cultivation speed, Yanfang felt both fear and jealousy in her heart. She gritted her teeth and said, If this guy continues to cultivate like this, sooner or later, he will reach the Jinshin phase earlier than my Shixiang. If I teach Yanhua to cultivate, I'm afraid I won't be able to catch up with him in this lifetime. Yanhua was greatly disappointed. Aunt, then how long do I need to catch up to him? Yanfang's face was livid and she did not speak. Yanhua tentatively said, 3 months. Yanfang was furious. 3 months. Do you think you're the three pure heavenly emperor or old ancestor Hong Jun? Do you know what realm Li Yundong is in? Do you know how strong he is? Even I, a top-level young spirit cultivator with decades of Xianmen orthodox kung fu, was beaten to this state by him. You don't know a fart, and you want to surpass him in 3 months? Hearing this, Yan Hua was stunned, and a burst of anger rose in his heart. However, he still suppressed his anger and asked tentatively, then, half a year? Seeing that Yin Fang was still angry, Yan Hua immediately changed his words and said, that year? 2 years. Could it be 3 years? In the end, Yan Hua's expression changed and he said, will I be suppressed by him for the rest of my senior year? Yan Fang sneered and said, unless you have a great opportunity, you will never be able to surpass Li Yundong in your lifetime. Yan Hua immediately asked, then what is a great opportunity? Yan Fang thought for a moment and said, Li Yundong has a body reconstructed by the Jin Dan, and he is a cultivation genius that only appears once in 100 years. Unless you get the Diyuan Jin Dan, it's absolutely impossible for you to surpass him. Yan Hua was disappointed, but he still asked unwillingly, then, what is the Diyuan Jin Dan? Where can I get it? Yan Fang sneered. She opened her mouth to say something, but she swallowed her words back. She turned her head, looked at Yan Hua coldly and said, don't worry about this. Since it's an opportunity, you can't force it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called an opportunity. I just want to ask you one thing. Since you hate Li Yundong so much, can you hold back your anger? Yan Hua asked in confusion, how can I hold back my anger? Yan Fang said, that is, don't expect to surpass him in a short period of time. You have to pretend to be his friend and stay by his side, enduring and lying in ambush until your kung fu surpasses his, and you are 100% sure that you can defeat him. Otherwise, you absolutely can't show any hostility to him. Not only can't you, but you also have to flatter him. Can you do that? Yan Hua's expression suddenly changed. He said angrily, how is this possible? I am a man. How can you ask me to do such a lowly thing? This is absolutely impossible. Yan Fang's expression suddenly changed. She scolded harshly. What did you say? How is this lowly? Yan Hua said angrily, Aunt, it's not like you don't know that I have a grudge against Li Yundong. How can you ask me to bow to him? If this isn't lowly, what is it? Yan Fang said angrily, do you know what kind of grudge I have against Li Yundong? He ruined my entire plan. But I still have to pretend to smile when I need to, and pretend to be a grandson when I need to. He is only 1 year older than my nephew. But so what? It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. I have endured like this for 9 years. As a man, don't you have any tolerance? Yan Hua roared, that's you. As a woman, how can you understand a man's self-esteem? I am a man. I would rather be beaten to death by him than do such a shameful thing. Yan Fang was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She rushed to Yan Hua angrily, wanting to grab his collar and roar at him. But as soon as she reached out and grabbed forward, her Yin spirit body suddenly passed through Yan Hua's body. Yan Fang was stunned, and Yan Hua's body was immersed in Yan Fang's Xianin Qi. Suddenly, his whole body felt cold, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He screamed and trembled in pain. Yan Fang's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Yan Hua with flickering eyes and thought to herself, I saw that this nephew's talent was not bad, and he had a grudge against Li Yundong. I thought he could inherit my mantle, but I didn't expect that he would be so useless. However, the yang qi in Yan Hua's body is so strong, and his talent is not bad. If coupled with my current cultivation. Thinking of this, Yan Fang's eyes suddenly showed a fierce light, but this kind of light only flashed for a moment. She slowly withdrew her hand, stared at Yan Hua with flickering eyes, and said in a slightly warmer tone, have you really thought about Li Yundong? After Yan Fang's yin qi left his body, Yan Hua immediately recovered a little. He shivered and looked at Yan Fang with some fear, but his face still showed a strong desire to become stronger, and he nodded vigorously. Yan Fang narrowed her eyes and asked in a deep voice, can you pay any price besides groveling? Yan Hua thought for a moment, gritted his teeth and said, yes. Yan Fang narrowed her eyes a little more, as if she didn't want her nephew to notice the fierce light in her eyes. Her voice was as cold as the cold wind blowing from the ice cave of hell. You won't regret it? Yanhua said loudly. No. That's good. Yanfang suddenly opened her eyes, and there was a dazzling and sharp cold light in them. Her face suddenly became extremely distorted and ferocious, and she let out a shrill roar. Her body turned into a green light, and in the blink of an eye, she pounced on Yanhua's body. Yanhua was caught off guard. With a loud roar, he curled up into a ball in pain and fell to the ground, struggling and twisting. However, Yanfang was prepared. She was also a cultivation master with extremely high cultivation. In addition, she had stabbed Yanhua's mind with yin qi before, which made him panic for a while, and make him unable to concentrate on fighting against the invading Yanfang in his sea of consciousness. In addition, Yanhua couldn't believe that his aunt was going to take over his body. In a panic, his divine sense was swallowed up by Yanfang little by little. Slowly, his soul was occupied and swallowed up by Yanfang. Time passed second by second. Yanhua's body, which was constantly twisting and struggling on the ground, also calmed down little by little. Finally, he lay quietly on the ground, without any reaction at all. After a while, there was a sudden knock on the door of Yanhua's bedroom. It was Yanhua's mother shouting at the door. Hua, are you all right? At this time, Yanhua, who was lying on the floor, suddenly opened his eyes. He sat up stiffly like a zombie. He looked down at his hands expressionlessly and said loudly, I'm fine. Yanhua's mother shouted at the door. I heard you talking to someone in the room. Who is it? Yanhua said loudly. I'm talking to someone on the phone. Yanhua's mother did not suspect anything. She muttered a few words at the door, and finally, the sound of footsteps gradually faded away. At this time, Yanhua slowly stood up. His hands and feet were a little uncoordinated, and his movements were stiff and rusty. He walked to a floor-to-ceiling mirror, opened his eyes wide, and looked himself up and down. All of a sudden Yanhua, no, it should be Yanfang, suddenly burst into laughter. As she laughed, tears flowed down her face. After laughing for a while, she suddenly covered her face and cried again. She cried like a ghost, and her sobs made people's hair stand on end. But after crying for a while, Yanfang giggled strangely. She looked at the extremely strange self in the mirror, and couldn't help giggling coldly. I used to hate myself for being a woman with 5 holes in my cultivation, but now I'm a man with 7 treasures. It won't be long before I can recover all my power, and I'll be far stronger than before. Yanfang sneered and said, Li Yundong, let's wait and see. I won't let you get away with it. Yanfang turned her head and looked out of the window with cold eyes. At this time, her figure cast a shadow on the ground with the help of the moonlight, which was twisted and strange. Outside the window next to her, a silver crescent moon was hanging high in the sky, like the cold and vicissitudes of the heavens. It was coldly watching the vast land, coldly watching the gratitude and resentment of the world. I feel very uncomfortable. Tonight, I'll make up for everyone tomorrow. Sorry. Chapter 545. While Yanfang was taking over the body, Li Yundong and Su Chan had already left the school and said goodbye to Chris, Feng Na, and the others. They went to the internet. 7K. OM. Along the way, the little girl held Li Yundong's arm and rubbed her stomach, saying sadly, Yundong, I'm starving. I haven't eaten all day. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Only then did he remember that the little girl hadn't eaten anything since she came back with Ao Wushuang in the morning. He had thought that she would be able to eat something at the banquet in the evening, but she still hadn't eaten. Li Yundong couldn't help patting the little girl's head and saying, Well, I'll make something delicious for you when we go back. What do you want to eat? The little girl looked up and giggled. I like everything you cook. Li Yundong thought for a moment. Coincidentally, the two of them had already returned to the community and passed by a supermarket nearby. Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay, I'll make seafood for you today. Hearing this, the little girl's appetite was aroused. She beamed and said, Okay, I want to eat crabs. Li Yundong waved his hand and said, Okay. The two of them turned around and went to the supermarket. After buying a few pounds of crabs in the seafood section, Su-chan walked home with a basket of crabs in her hand. After entering the house, Li Yundong and Su-chan saw the little foxes watching TV in the living room. The little fox Ling Yu saw Li Yundong at a glance and immediately shouted, "Leader is back!" The other little foxes also began to clamor. "Leader, you took Su-chan out to eat, leaving us at home with nothing to eat. It's not fair." Li Yundong asked curiously, "You didn't eat? Where's Ziyuan?" Su-chan thought to herself, has the dignified Ziyuan become the chef of the Fox Zen school? Why is Yundong's first reaction when there's no food to eat? No, I have to learn how to cook, so that Yundong will think of me first in the future. Ling Yu said, "Ziyuan went out. After you went out, I don't know where she went." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Didn't she make you something to eat before she left?" Ling Yu complained, "No, she left in a hurry, so we each ate a bowl of instant noodles." As she spoke, she noticed the crab in Su-chan's hand and immediately said happily, "Shall we eat seafood tonight?" Su-chan quickly hid the crab behind her back. "Yundong bought this for me." The faces of Ling Yu and the little foxes suddenly fell. They looked at Li Yundong with hidden bitterness and said, "Leader, you can't favor one and discriminate against the other." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, Okay, I'll go make something now." As he said this, he turned to Su-chan and said with a smile, "Well, there are so many crabs. You can't eat them all by yourself. Moreover, crabs are cold and belong to Een. It's not good for you to eat too much. Share some with Shiji and Shimi, okay?" Su-chan pouted unhappily. She thought for a moment and said, "Then you have to teach me how to do it. Otherwise, when you're gone, I won't have anything to eat. I'll have to eat instant noodles like them. That would be so pitiful." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, I'll teach you." He said to the little foxes, "You guys watch TV. I'll go cook." The little foxes immediately cheered, "Long live leader." Li Yundong shook his head and laughed. He put on his apron and went into the kitchen. Su-chan followed behind him, watching Li Yundong's every move with her big eyes and memorizing it in her heart. When she saw that Li Yundong had washed the crabs, boiled the water in the pot next to him, and was about to throw the crabs in to cook, the little girl couldn't bear it and let out a cry. Li Yundong looked back and saw that the little girl was covering her eyes with her hands. Her eyes were peeking through the gap between her fingers, looking timidly at the scene of the crabs being cooked. Li Yundong knew that Su-chan was kind and soft-hearted, so he said with a smile, "Don't worry. They will be free in a while." As he said this, he threw the crabs in one by one. Su-chan looked at the crabs. At first, they were still struggling inside, but soon their shells were cooked red. She couldn't bear it, so she softly recited the Great Compassion mantra. But after a while, she saw a crab stepping on the body of its companion and desperately trying to climb out of the pot. Seeing that it was about to climb out, the little girl immediately stepped forward, reached out, and flicked the crab back into the pot. The poor crab, who was trying to escape, was flicked by Su-chan and immediately rolled back into the pot. It turned over in the boiling water, and after a while, it was completely cooked. Li Yundong turned his head to look at Su-chan and said with a faint smile, "Benefactor, what a cruel method." Su-chan made a face at Li Yundong, put her palms together and said, "Ba, the sooner you die, the sooner you can be reincarnated." Li Yundong laughed and affectionately pinched the little girl's nose. After the two of them were busy in the kitchen for a while, when the little girl was about to go out with the dishes, she suddenly met Ao Wushuang coming out of the room. The little girl immediately smiled and said, "Master, dinner is ready. Let's eat together." Ao Wushuang frowned. She forced a smile at Su-chan and said, "You guys eat. I have something to do. I'll go out for a while." As she said this, she walked to the balcony by herself. Without saying goodbye to Li Yundong and the little foxes of the Fox Zen school, she turned into a blue light and quickly left. It was already late at night, and no one noticed Ao Wushuang flying in the air. She flew all the way to Dongwu City. When she arrived at the familiar Shantang town, she found a place where no one was around and landed. Although it was already late at night, Shanting town was still brightly lit. The antique buildings were covered with colorful lights. From a distance, it looked like a colorful dragon stretching along the moat. There were still a lot of tourists in the market, and the aroma of snacks was curling up, and the sound of hawking could be heard. Ao Wushuang walked quickly through the ancient street and arrived at her former residence. When she came to the door, she suddenly froze. Her outstretched hand also stopped in the air, as if she was hesitating about something. Ao Wushuang secretly squeezed a paper crane in her other hand. She gritted her teeth, pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as she entered, Ao Wushuang saw a tall and burly man sitting with his back to her. In front of the man was a square table, and next to the table were two square stools. On one of the stools sat a fashionably dressed and coquettish woman. The woman was holding an oil lamp while looking at Ao Wushuang with interest. The man seemed to know that Ao Wushuang was coming. Without turning his head, he pointed to the empty stool opposite him and said in a hoarse and old voice, "You're here? Sit down." Ao Wushuang took a deep breath and slowly walked over to the man. She saw that there was a go set in front of the man, and two jars of black and white chess pieces were placed in front of her. Ao Wushuang was not in a hurry to sit down. She said in a deep voice, "Why did you ask me to come here?" The man smiled slightly, put down a black chess piece and said, "Don't you have anything to ask me?" Ao Wushuang frowned. "Yes, I have too many questions to ask you. But can you tell me everything?" The man smiled and said, "How do you know if I will tell you if you don't ask?" Ao Wushuang sat down and said coldly, "Lu Yi, why are you pretending to be dead? What are you going to do?" Lu Yi smiled slightly and pushed the white chess piece in front of him to Ao Wushuang. He didn't answer her question and said, "Don't worry, play with me." Ao Wushuang stared straight at Lu Yi like an eagle. She didn't even look at the chess piece and immediately pushed it back. "I'm not good at Go. I don't want to play." Lu Yi didn't mind. He chuckled and said, "I forgot." He turned to the coquettish woman beside him and said, "Mei Nyang, go get a set of chess." Mei Nyang smiled charmingly, twisted her waist, and left gracefully. After a while, she came back with another set of chess. Lu Yi slowly put away the Go set in front of him, and then laid the chessboard. While arranging the chess pieces with Ao Wushuang, he said, "I've always been puzzled. Why do you like to play chess but not Go?" Ao Wushuang said lightly, "Go is too exhausting. I don't like it." Lu Yi sighed softly and said, "Go is the way of war. Every step contains the art of war. So every move is a strategy, and every move is full of killing intent. The master has already controlled the overall situation quietly. When the people in the game find out, it will be too late to reverse the situation." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Humph, that's why I don't like Go. I don't like the feeling of being manipulated." As she spoke, she raised her head, looked around at her former residence and said, "Did you buy this place?" Lu Yi nodded slightly and said, "I just rented it again. You lived here for so long. If someone else rented it, you would be very sad even if you don't say it." Ao Wushuang was expressionless. She held the red chessboard, picked up a cannon with her slender fingers, and put it in the middle of the chessboard with a snap. After a fierce cannon, she said, "Do you want to play the emotional card? Well, let me ask you, why did you pretend to be dead? When you came to me, you had already planned it, didn't you?" Lu Yi smiled slightly. He pressed his fingers on his horse and moved it forward gently. He resolved Ao Wushuang's attack with a move of 8 and 7. He said, "In fact, with your intelligence, when you saw me in Mount Qingcheng, you should have been able to guess it." Ao Wushuang's eyes suddenly shone brightly. She quickly moved a pawn and said coldly, "It's really you. It's okay that you massacred Mount Qingcheng. But why did you put the blame on Li Yundong? Don't you know that you will bring great trouble to Mount Qingcheng? Will you implicate Li Yundong by doing this?" Lu Yi smiled faintly and also moved a pawn on the other side, saying, "When did you start to care about Li Yundong so much?" Ao Wushuang also responded and said in a cold voice, "He is the partner of my disciple. Even if I don't care about the monk, I care about the Buddha. How can I not like him?" Lu Yi sighed softly and shook his head slightly. "You are too emotional. You are cold on the outside but warm on the inside. This is your Achilles heel. Ao Wushuang snorted coldly and didn't say anything. She quickly played chess with Lu Yi. The two of them played back and forth quickly, and soon it became a seesaw situation. However, it was obvious that Lu Yi's chess skills were better. After a while, Lu Yi was in a situation where two chariots were trying to seize the throne and force Li Yundong to abdicate. Ao Wushuang had distracting thoughts in her mind, so it was very difficult for her to play. She frowned slightly and had no choice but to take the lead. Lu Yi smiled slightly and said, "You ask me why I want to frame Li Yundong? Hey, look at the situation in front of you. Li Yundong is like this old marshal. He always moves in his own territory and almost never goes out. If I don't force him to abdicate, will he be able to run out by himself?" Ao Wushuang frowned and said coldly, "You don't even forget to plot against people while playing chess? Is he also your chess piece?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "The sky is the curtain, and the earth is the chessboard. All the living beings on this earth are chess pieces." Ao Wushuang said coldly, "Then how can you be sure that he must be this old marshal? How can you be sure that you will win?" This is the second chapter to make up for yesterday. What a tragedy. At the age of 29, I have wisdom teeth. How painful. Half of my face is almost swollen. Ordinary people have 36 teeth, but Buddha has 40 teeth. Am I going to be like Buddha? Vote for recommendation previous page. Next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 546. After Ao Wushuang finished speaking, she controlled a pawn and walked toward Lu Yi's nest step by step with great determination. Go to the internet. Lu Yi quickly glanced at Ao Wushuang's pawn. He smiled slightly and said, "Isn't it enough to seize the general with 2 rooks? Well, where's the holy shit horse?" With that said, with a snap, a horse that had been hidden for a long time suddenly jumped out, forming a dangerous situation of a chain attack to force the emperor to abdicate. Ao Wushuang's face was as cold as frost. While playing calmly, she made her pawn move from time to time. Mei Nyang, who was standing to one side, saw that the two of them were playing quickly, and the chessboard was clattering. Although they were old acquaintances, there was a hidden meaning in their words, and the chessboard was full of killing intent. Mei Nyang glanced at the two of them. When her eyes fell on the chessboard, she suddenly said in surprise, "Oh, this pawn is going to be a general." Ao Wushuang looked up at her and sneered. "A true gentleman doesn't talk when watching chess. Don't you understand?" As she said this, she raised her hand and slapped the pawn across the river. She was only 1 step away from Lu Yi's general. Ao Wushuang said coldly, "You only care about your chessboard, but you don't notice that this pawn has already approached your hinterland and is going straight for the yellow dragon. How do you know that Li Jiandong won't be forced to become a pawn by you when the time comes?" Lu Yi laughed out loud. He picked up his holy shit horse, put it down, and said, "What if I kill you first, General?" Ao Wushuang took a look and saw that the chessboard had become a dead game. Her general had nowhere to hide, and her pawn had to take 1 more step to reach Lu Yi's general. She didn't even look at her own house. She still stubbornly made a move and approached Lu Yi's general. Lu Yi shook his head and said with a smile, "You're still the same as before, stubborn and stubborn. You know that there's no result, but you still choose to do this." As he said this, he moved his horse and slapped Ao Wushuang's face, saying, "You lost." Ao Wushuang was silent for a long time. She stood up and walked out without saying a word. When she reached the door, she suddenly turned around and said, "The reason why you can win is that the rules of chess restrict the pawn to only take 1 step. Although all living beings are pawns in your eyes, and you can use your schemes to force them to take the step that you have planned for them. But," Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "don't forget that chess pieces are dead, but people are alive. Even if Li Yundong is just a pawn, he is the kind of strong person who has the ability to change the rules and the situation. He is no longer the green beginner we know. When you thought that he could only take one step, he could take 2 steps in a row and directly kill you. Moreover, Li Yundong has Wang Yuanshan's talent, but he is not as pedantic and stubborn as him. If you want to use him, be careful that you will be used by him. As she said this, Ao Wushuang seemed to sigh. She looked up at the vast starry sky and sighed. This kind of person is usually unknown, but suddenly you give him an opportunity, and he will immediately turn into a dragon. Although he's hibernating in this world right now, spending his days doing all kinds of daily necessities, when he suddenly soars into the sky one day, you better be careful that the entire sky will be shaken by him, and your so-called situation will be overturned by him. Ao Wushuang lowered her head and said with a face full of sarcasm, "When that day comes, you will find that the situation has never been in your hands. Besides, think about it carefully. Has he never done what you have planned?" Lu Yi smiled and said, "We'll ride a donkey and read the libretto. Let's wait and see." Ao Wushuang snorted, and a sharp light suddenly shot out of her eyes. "I don't care what you want to do, and I don't care whether you want to resurrect the mystical silver fox or not. But if you dare to get my disciple involved, I will definitely kill you." Lu Yi remained calm. After watching Ao Wushuang's figure disappear into the night, he frowned little by little. Ao Wushuang's words echoed in his ears like a great bell. Lu Yi muttered to himself in a low voice, "The situation. Will it evolve according to what I think?" Lu Yi thought of all kinds of terrifying talents and incredible fighting talents that Li Yundong had shown since he had started cultivating. At this moment his heart, which was as still as water, couldn't help but be a little shaken. But at this moment, a middle-aged man with a goatee came out of the inner room. This man was Wan Jinyuan. He looked in the direction in which Ao Wushuang had left and said in a deep voice, "What, do you want to continue? Even your disciple is going to go against you." Lu Ye's wavering only lasted for a moment, and soon his eyes focused again. He said in a low voice, "I've been working hard for 15 years, and I'm about to succeed. I can't give up halfway. Since I've done such a big thing in Mount Qingsheng, how can I stop halfway? There's no turning back." As he said this, Lu Yi turned his head and looked at Wan Jinyuan coldly. He said, "Go and contact the 6 great sects and Jingyi school. In addition, send the news to Mount Qingsheng. Next month will be the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect. Ziyuan will succeed as the leader of the Linggong sect at that time. Jingyi school will definitely not let her take over easily. Li Yundong has such a close relationship with Ziyuan that he will definitely not stand by and watch. Hey! The Zhengyi school regards this ceremony as a grand ceremony for them to throw stones and find out the way in their plan to unify the cultivation world. At that time, the 10 golden bodies will definitely gather together, which will also be our best opportunity." Wan Jinyuan snorted and sneered. "Unify the cultivation world. They're dreaming." As he said this, he turned around and walked into the shadows again. At the same time, in the Taoist field of the Linggong sect on the side peak of Mount Longhu in Jiangxi, Ziyuan was standing quietly next to a pine tree. The pine tree next to her was crooked and trying to poke its head out of the cliff. Under the lush canopy of the pine tree, there was a primordial stone that looked like a flat mirror lying quietly. There were a few big words engraved on the primordial stone, "Fengchen Stone." Ziyuan stood silently in the moonlight, leaning against the stone and the pine tree. Her figure was ethereal and elegant, and her clothes were fluttering in the wind, like an immortal. While she was quietly looking at the sea of clouds outside the cliff, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. Without looking back, Ziyuan asked lightly, "Have you found it?" Wan Hongling shook her head with a disappointed look on her face. "No, Shiji Ziyuan, did you remember wrongly?" Ziyuan turned her head abruptly and said with a surprised look on her face, "No? That's impossible. Master told me that this powerful magical weapon was hidden under the mountain spring in the backyard of the Linggong temple behind the Fengchen stone." Wan Hongling frowned and said, "I've searched everywhere. I even turned into a Yin spirit and went into the ground to search. If I continue searching, I'm afraid that the earth god will come out to make trouble for me. Shiji Ziyuan, why did you pull me out in the middle of the night? What on earth are you looking for? Ziyuan frowned slightly. She pondered for a moment, and her brows were full of worry. Wan Hongling took a step forward, took her arm and said, Shiji, you should at least tell me. I'm your junior sister. Ziyuan's brows relaxed and she smiled. Is there a need to be a relationship? Fool. What I want you to find is a powerful magical weapon that Master had secretly left behind in the past. Wan Hongling immediately smiled in surprise and said, Really? Did Master leave something behind before he ascended? Well, of the 3 major powerful magical weapons of our Linggong sect, 2 have been destroyed. The sky-reaching glass mirror and the purple gold luo jade plate have been destroyed, and only the Bahuang and Liuha are left. However, such powerful magical weapons are still in the hands of Li Yunyang and Ao Wushuang. The 3 great magical weapons of our Linggong sect only exist in name. It's really shameful to say it out loud. When the time comes for the inauguration ceremony of the leader, if the Jingyi school asks us to take out these 3 ancestral powerful magical weapons, and we can't, we will be in big trouble. Ziyuan nodded slightly and said, It's not just in case, but the Jingyi school will definitely ask us to take out these 3 powerful magical weapons. If we can't take them out, they will take the opportunity to interfere in the internal affairs of our sect, disqualify me from taking over as the leader, and then annex our Linggong sect. Wan Hongling's face changed greatly. What should we do? Ziyuan said. So, I have to find such a powerful magical weapon left behind by Master. He once told me that if I encounter any terrible danger or difficulties, I should take out this powerful magical weapon. But I can't let others know, otherwise there will be a great disaster. Wan Hongling became more and more curious. What kind of powerful magical weapon is it? Ziyuan said word by word in an extremely solemn tone. The mirror of heaven and earth. Wan Hongling suddenly turned pale with fright. She sucked in a breath of cold air and said in horror, What? Does this powerful magical weapon really exist? Isn't this the powerful magical weapon used by the legendary Heavenly Lord of Yuanshi? Ziyuan sighed slightly and said, I used to think that the immortal pen was a legendary powerful magical weapon that didn't exist, but what about now? Isn't it still out in the world? Wan Hongling couldn't help but ask, Then why is this powerful magical weapon not here now? Is it because I didn't find it? I'll look for it again. Wan Hongling was an impatient person. After saying that, she immediately turned around and ran away. But after a while, she came back dejectedly. Seeing her like this, Ziyuan knew that she hadn't found it. She sighed slightly and said, Forget it, if you can't find it, then you can't find it. More than 9 years have passed. Maybe it has been taken away by someone who is fated. I just hope. Alas! Wan Hongling said with flagging interest. Just hope what? Ziyuan sighed slightly and said, I just hope that the person who obtained the mirror of heaven and earth will keep a low profile. Otherwise, it will definitely cause a great disaster. Wan Hongling asked casually, Why? Isn't it good to have such a good powerful magical weapon? Ziyuan shook her head and said, The mirror of heaven and earth is known as the supreme magical weapon of Taoism. It can be said to be the #1 magical weapon in the world for cultivation. Although no one has used it, its reputation alone is enough to attract countless cultivators to snatch it. An ordinary man is innocent, but he will get into trouble because of his wealth. Only then did Wan Hongling understand, but she quickly asked strangely, But Shiji Ziyuan, why do you want to find this powerful magical weapon at this time? Ziyuan sighed softly, and her eyebrows were full of worry. There is still a month before the inauguration ceremony of the head of the sect. At that time, there will definitely be a new wave of open and secret struggles, and there will definitely be a lot of fighting. How can the Jingyi school, the Qingqing sect, and the other sects be willing to suffer such a big loss? Next time, they will definitely send the Jinshin masters of the sect. I'm afraid that the world's famous 10 Jinshin masters will also appear. Moreover, the world is so big that there are crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Apart from the 10 Jinshin masters, how many Jinshin masters are hiding in the streets? The Jinshin masters are only masters at the 7th heaven. What about the masters at the 8th heaven of lightning retribution? What about the golden immortal masters at the 9th heaven of lightning retribution? At that time, our Lingong sect will be invaded from the inside, and there will be no strong reinforcements from the outside. It will be difficult for the two of us to handle it alone. How can we cope with it? Wan Hongling couldn't help saying. But won't Li Yundong help us? Zi Yuan shook her head slightly and said, that's what I'm worried about. Although Li Yundong's temperament had changed after he came out of the spirit space, he had changed from a young and inexperienced boy to a calm and composed man with the temperament of a great master. But his character of valuing friendship and righteousness had not changed. With his character, he will definitely do his best to help. But if he makes a move, can he beat a Jinshin master? Wan Hongling was stunned when she heard this. She was also a cultivator with a high cultivation quotient. She also knew that although Li Yundong's cultivation quotient was strong and abnormal, he was now facing a bottleneck, which was the watershed between the Yangshan phase and the Jinshin phase. If he passed this hurdle, Li Yundong would be a well-deserved great cultivator in the world, a great Jinren, and a great master. If he couldn't pass this hurdle and met a Jinshin master, no matter how powerful a Yangshan master was, he would suffer a great loss. In the cultivation world, there was even a saying that 10 Yang spirits can't beat a Jinshin. Wan Hongling said tentatively to Zi Yuan. So, you want to find the mirror of heaven and earth for Li Yundong to use? Zi Yuan sighed softly and said, yes, I believe that with such a powerful magical weapon, Li Yundong should be able to get through this bottleneck. Unfortunately, human will is not as good as God's will. Wan Hongling asked curiously. But Shiji Zi Yuan, why didn't you use it yourself before? Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, Master said that I can't use this powerful magical weapon, because I'm not a person with great luck. Only those who have God's Dharmakaya, or have the blessings of heaven and earth can use it. Otherwise, there will be a great disaster. Wan Hongling sighed and said, isn't Master a scourge? Fortunately, Master didn't tell me this news. Otherwise, if I knew that I had such a powerful magical weapon and didn't use it, I would have gone crazy. Shiji Zi Yuan, you are still the best. You can actually hold back from saying that you don't want to use it. Zi Yuan smiled faintly. She subconsciously stroked the Fengchen stone beside her and said, since we haven't found it, let's go back. Wan Hongling couldn't help but ask in surprise. What about the inauguration ceremony of the head in a month? Zi Yuan frowned slightly and said, I don't know. If it doesn't work, the Lingong sect will have to die in my hands. Wan Hongling suddenly jumped up and said, how can we do that? Zi Yuan sighed softly and smiled helplessly at Wan Hongling. Even the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers will be destroyed one day, let alone a sect. If God wants to destroy our Lingong sect, no one can stop him. Wan Hongling said without thinking. Li Yundong must have a way. Zi Yuan asked curiously, what way does he have? Wan Hongling was stunned and said with some lack of confidence, I don't know, but I think he should have a way. Zi Yuan shook her head and laughed. Don't be silly. How can we let the affairs of our sect implicate him? Come on, let's go back. After that, she took Wan Hongling and turned into a beam of blue light, flying into the air. When they were in the air, Zi Yuan couldn't help looking down at the Fengchen stone under her feet, which had turned into a grain of sand. She couldn't help thinking, does Li Yundong really have a way? There will be another update in a minute. Vote for recommendation previous page. Return to table of contents, next page error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 547. While Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling were looking for the powerful magical treasure left behind by Wang Yuanshan in Mount Longhu, Li Yundong was in his room checking Zhou Qin's cultivation progress. Go to the internet. Zhou Qin closed her eyes. After 16 cycles, she slowly exhaled and opened her eyes, only to see Li Yunyang smiling gently at her and saying, "Not bad. Your current cultivation is close to the Yangshan phase. Your cultivation speed is even faster than mine at the beginning. Amazing. Your heavenly Jindan technique has also been cultivated to the 7th phase, and you are only one step away from the 8th phase, the fire creation. Right now, your cultivation base has already reached a considerable level. You only lack some combat experience and the mastery of using magic treasures and spells. I will teach you some magic in a few days, and you will be a very good cultivator." Usually, Zhou Qin's face was as cold as an iceberg, but at this time, when she heard Li Yundong praise her, she only felt warm and sweet in her heart. The smile on her face was like a flower blooming in warm spring. She smiled and said, "Really? Why do I feel that my cultivation is so slow?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "You're slow? Then do you want other cultivators to live? Your speed is faster than mine. Are you mocking me?" After the Taoist assembly, Zhou Qin's admiration and respect for Li Yundong had reached an extreme level. She quickly said, "No, master, how could I dare to mock you? Compared to you, my cultivation is still far from your level." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "I'm joking with you. Don't be so nervous. As the saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Li Yundong said it casually, but Zhou Qin also felt that Li Yundong's words and actions revealed a mature and steady aura that a boy of his age did not have, as well as a free and easy feeling. Her eyes were full of admiration as she said, "Master, can I ask you a question?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Go ahead." Zhou Qin asked, "Master, are you the best in the world now?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "How is that possible?" Zhou Qin said strangely, "But they all call you invincible, Li." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Why do you believe the compliments of these people? How can I be invincible?" Zhou Qin frowned slightly and couldn't help saying, "But I saw that at the Taoist assembly, no one could defeat Tachibana Wakako. But master, with a single palm strike, Tachibana Wakako was scared to tears. If this isn't invincibility, then what is?" Li Yunyang smiled slightly and said, "Tachibana Wakako's kung fu comes from Jinyan Tantrism, and Jinyan Tantrism mainly worships the immovable Wisdom King. When I show the Wisdom King's Faz Hen, it's like a gangster seeing his big brother. How can his legs not go soft? Therefore, no matter how fierce she is, she does not dare to fight with me. If she really fights with me, the actual gap between us will not be as big as you think. After all, she is still the Mahamayuri. If she was a goddess and not a witch, she could invite Mahamayuri to descend to the mortal world, and even I would not be her opponent now." Zhou Qin was shocked and asked, "Is there anyone more powerful than Tachibana Wakako in Japan?" Li Yunyang nodded and said, "Of course there is. There are 3 levels above the witch, namely, the Aoan goddess, the Ksitigarbha goddess, and the Amaterasu goddess. Among them, the Aoan goddess is a powerful cultivator who can talk directly with the gods. She is equivalent to a Jinshin master in our cultivation world. The Ksitigarbha goddess is equivalent to a master of thunder retribution, and the Amaterasu goddess is equivalent to a master of the golden immortal level." Zhou Qin's expression was a little strange. She said, "Is there such a powerful person in Japan?" Li Yunyang said, "There should be a goddess at the Aoan level, which is equivalent to a master at the level of a sect. I don't know about the Ksitigarbha goddess and the Amaterasu goddess. Just like I know that there are Jinshin masters in this world, I'm not sure if there are thunder retribution and real golden immortal masters in this world." Zhou Qin thought for a moment and asked, "Master, I've always been confused. Don't many cultivation classics say that the Yang spirit is the top realm of cultivators? Even Zhang Samfeng said that the Yang spirit is the top realm of cultivation. Why is there a realm above the Yang spirit?" Li Yunyang smiled slightly and said, "I expected you to ask this question. At the beginning, I had the same question as you. I always had all kinds of doubts about cultivation. In fact, what you said is right. The yang spirit is indeed the top realm of cultivators. This is a realm that people rely on their own strength. They don't need elixirs, and only rely on their own Niden to cultivate. As long as they succeed in the Juji phase, they will be able to cultivate to this realm sooner or later. However, when a person's physical body reaches the Yangshan phase, there is no way for him to break through again. Because human strength is limited. No matter how strong a person's body is, it's impossible to have infinite power. Think about it. No matter how strong a person is, can he really carry a mountain alone? It's impossible, right? Because the power of the body is limited, people can only rely on the power of the body to cultivate. After their cultivation reaches the yang spirit phase, it is the peak. But at this time, if people want to cultivate again, they must borrow the power of heaven and earth. Zhou Qin asked curiously and puzzledly, borrow the power of heaven and earth? Li Yundong nodded and said, that's right. Cultivation pays attention to the unity of heaven and man. Using one's own jinqi as a medium to mobilize the power of heaven and earth, thus using all kinds of magical artifacts and magic. If people want to cultivate from the yang spirit to the jinshin, they must take elixirs. The way is to take the Diyuan Jindan, one of the 3 great elixirs of life. If there is no Diyuan Jindan, they must take all kinds of other elixirs to assist them. Think about it. Where do the medicinal materials of these elixirs grow? Zhou Qin's eyes lit up. She seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, deep mountains and forests? Li Yundong showed a look of admiration and said, that's right. The medicinal materials of these elixirs grow in the mountains and forests. They gather the spiritual qi between heaven and earth. After cultivators take them, they will be of great benefit. They will greatly enhance the power of the Niden and constantly strengthen their jinqi. Therefore, to cultivate to the jinshin phase, one can achieve it by taking elixirs and constantly absorbing the spiritual qi between heaven and earth. Zhou Qin asked again, what about the thunder retribution phase? Is it also borrowing power from heaven and earth? Li Yundong nodded and said, that's right. The jinshin phase mainly borrows power from the earth, because medicinal herbs grow on the earth, while the thunder retribution phase borrows power from the sky, because thunder begins above the 9th heaven. Only by placing the jinshin in the sky where thunder is raging and absorbing the power of thunder can cultivators continue to strengthen themselves. This is borrowing power from heaven. That's why there is such a saying as thunder retribution. However, although thunder retribution can greatly strengthen cultivators, it is also a very dangerous thing. If you are not careful, your body and soul will be destroyed, and there will be no room for remedy or regret. Hearing this, Zhou Qin couldn't help but be shocked. She asked, then master, you must be careful when you go through thunder retribution. Li Yundong laughed and said, thunder retribution? I'm not even in the jinshin phase. How can I go through thunder retribution? It's courting death to go through thunder retribution with the body of the yang spirit. Let's wait until I reach the peak of the jinshin phase. Zhou Qin's heart skipped a beat. She asked, master, how long will it take for you to reach the jinshin phase? Li Yundong frowned slightly and sighed. This is something that can only be encountered by chance. Wan Jinyuan told me that as long as I find the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, he can refine the Diyuan Jindan. If I have the Diyuan Jindan, I think I should be able to reach the jinshin phase smoothly, right? Zhou Qin asked curiously. The 1,000-year-old snow lotus? Where is it? I'll find someone to buy it for you. Li Yundong glanced at Zhou Qin with a smile and said, don't be silly. This thing can't be bought. It grows on the top of the holy mountain in Tibet, and is protected by the divine mountain-protecting monk. Even if you exchange a mountain of gold with these lamas, they won't exchange it, let alone buy it with money. When Zhou Qin heard this, she suddenly let out a cry. Li Yundong asked curiously, what's wrong with you? Why are you so surprised? Zhou Qin seemed to suddenly remember something. She smiled awkwardly at Li Yundong and said, master, there's something I forgot to tell you. Li Yundong smiled and said, what is it? Zhou Qin said with a wry smile. Didn't I tell you last time that I met Meidua when I was in Juji phase in Tibet? Li Yundong asked. I remember. What's wrong? Zhou Qin sighed and said, after meeting Meiduo, I climbed to the top of Carry Holy Mountain to Zhuji Phase. After I succeeded, I met Master Dorji Tenzin. He said that Master Erdini asked him to pass on a message. Li Yundong asked curiously, did he pass it on to you? Zhou Qin shook her head and smiled embarrassedly. No, he passed it on to you, Master. It's just that when I came back, you happened to be cultivating in the spirit space, so I didn't have time to tell you. After that, I immediately went to the Taoist assembly. As a result, so many things happened at the Taoist assembly that I forgot to say it for a while. Li Yundong smiled and said, it doesn't matter. What's the matter? Zhou Qin said, Master Erdini said that you only learned half of the Mahamudra Kung Fu. He also said that when you go up the mountain in the future, you must go east. Li Yundong was surprised. I only learned half of the Mahamudra Kung Fu? No way, I followed. The book is not complete? Besides, what does it mean to go up the mountain from the east? Zhou Qin shook her head and said, I don't know either. That's what Master Erdini told Dorji Tenzin. And that's what Dorji Tenzin told me. Li Yundong nodded slowly. He thought for a while and said to himself, did Master Erdini expect that I would go to the Holy Mountain? Wan Jinyuan. Did he also know that I would go to the Holy Mountain? So he proposed this deal with me? It can't be so coincidental, can it? Zhou Qin heard Li Yundong talking to himself. Although she was a little confused, she still vaguely figured out some meaning. She asked tentatively, Master, are you going to Tibet? Li Yundong thought about it seriously, as if he was a little hesitant. Zhou Qin couldn't help asking, Master, what are you hesitating about? Li Yundong said in a deep voice, Wan Jinyuan is a scheming hero. I'm worried that this is a trap he has planned, so I've been worried about whether I should go or not. However, Zhou Qin laughed and said, Master, this is not your style. Don't you always say that, even if there are tens of thousands of people, you will still go? Moreover, you can't catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den, let alone something as precious as the Diyuan Jindan. Besides, I've seen Master Erdini. He is indeed an eminent monk. I believe that he won't conspire with Wan Jinyuan to frame you, will he? Moreover, Meiduo is now the new Bonda Lam, and she is your friend. It's even more impossible for her to harm you. I believe that you will definitely get this 1,000-year-old lotus. It's destined. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He looked at Zhou Qin in surprise and couldn't help laughing. What a wake-up call. You're right. I worry too much. Seeing that Li Yundong was listening to her advice, Zhou Qin couldn't help but smile and say, Master, you have to think about too many things all day long. All the heavy burdens of the Fox Zen school are on you, and you have to worry about our safety. Therefore, there are many things to consider, and it's normal for you to be cautious. Li Yundong laughed and said, Yes, you talk a lot. You must remind me more in the future. Hearing this, Zhou Qin felt warm in her heart. She looked at Li Yundong lovingly and thought to herself, Master, I will always be by your side to remind you. She stared blankly at Li Yundong's handsome side profile, and was a little dazed for a moment. Li Yundong didn't know that Zhou Qin had revealed her daughter's thoughts at this moment. He thought for a moment and said, Since I've made up my mind, there's no time to lose. I'll go out tomorrow. Zhou Qin collected her thoughts and couldn't help saying, Master, I'll go with you. Li Yundong shook his head with a smile and said, No, it's convenient for me to go alone. If there is really a trap, it's convenient for me to escape alone. You stay at home and take charge. Desanxian will reopen tomorrow. We can't do without you here. Zhou Qin was a little disappointed, but she still smiled and nodded. Well, she turned around, took the Liuhe sword, and handed it to Li Yundong. Master, this is your powerful magical weapon. Take it with you, or I'll be worried. Li Yundong said with a smile. I don't need this thing. It's better for you to keep it. However, Zhou Qin stubbornly shook her head and said, Master, this Liuhe is your powerful magical weapon. If I use it, it will be greatly reduced. If you keep it by your side, it will be like adding wings to a tiger. Moreover, if you take me with you, I will be more at ease. Otherwise, even if the Liuha is by my side, I will be restless every day. Even if I have great ability, I won't be able to use it. Li Yundong saw that Zhou Qin's words were reasonable, so he nodded with a smile. He reached out to take the sword, but at the moment he took it, their fingers touched and their skin touched. Suddenly, their bodies trembled as if there was an electric current flowing through them. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at Zhou Qin, only to see that his beautiful disciple was staring at him. Although her eyes were calm, Li Yundong could clearly sense the suppressed fanatical love and admiration that was boiling like lava behind the calmness. Li Yundong's heart trembled, and he immediately stood up. He coughed awkwardly and said, I'll take the Liuha with me. You have to take care of yourself. It won't be long before I come back. As he spoke, he quickly fled the room. Zhou Qin couldn't help shouting behind him, Master, this is your room. But when she was about to say something, Li Yundong had already disappeared. Zhou Qin sighed faintly. She looked in the direction in which Li Yundong had left, and for a moment she was stunned. Chapter 548. Early in the morning, after saying goodbye to Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others, Li Yundong set out on the road to Tibet again alone. Because Li Yundong was going to go and return as soon as possible, not only did he refuse Zhou Qin's company, he didn't even take Su Chan with him. He didn't even take any luggage with him. He flew to Tibet alone. Because the altitude was much higher than most places in China, the late winter in Tibet was particularly cold. Unlike Zhou Qin, who had traveled thousands of miles to Tibet to build the Zhuji phase, when Li Yundong arrived in Tibet again, the sky was not snowing, but it was a little hazy. The ice and snow piled up on the snow plateau decorated the magnificent plateau with silver. In particular, the rolling mountains stretched between heaven and earth, like a silver dragon winding around, about to wake up in the next second. As soon as he flew over the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, Li Yundong immediately felt that the ground was much closer to him, and the sky seemed to be much lower. There seemed to be a pair of eyes hidden in the dark and thick clouds, staring at him silently, dignified and solemn. After flying for a while, Li Yundong landed on the ground again. Fortunately, there were few people on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, and no one noticed him. Li Yundong walked along the road and slowly walked into Lhasa, the political and religious center of Tibet. When the first sign appeared, Li Yundong clearly found that the traffic on the road had increased. Many off-road vehicles and buses were speeding across the spacious road. Most of these vehicles were the private cars of backpackers, or the chartered cars of tour groups. These tourists looked at Li Yundong curiously from the window. In their opinion, it was a little rare for a traveler like Li Yundong, who had no luggage and was dressed like a Han, to walk alone on the road. Many people pointed at him and whispered. Li Yundong didn't mind, but when someone waved at him, he smiled politely and nodded at them, then continued to walk unhurriedly toward the downtown of Lhasa. As Li Yundong walked, he enjoyed the magnificent winter scenery of Tibet. Wherever he looked, he felt that there was nothing that could not be painted. Even the worst cameraman could take the most beautiful scene in the world with his eyes closed, and his camera aimed at a place. Li Yundong looked at it and sighed in his heart. He thought to himself, if it weren't for the fact that the power of Tibetan Buddhism in this place is too strong and deep-rooted, I'm afraid that the Taoist cultivators would have snatched such a treasure land long ago. Cultivating in such a place would yield twice the results with half the effort. Thinking of cultivation, Li Yundong suddenly saw a large bus roaring past him. As usual, there were many warm-hearted tourists curiously poking their heads out of the windows to look at such a strange traveler. Li Yundong still smiled and nodded at them. But before long, the bus suddenly stopped, and a woman wearing sunglasses and a down jacket got out of it. After the woman got out of the car, she waved at Li Yundong enthusiastically and unexpectedly. Hey! Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. He glanced at the woman and saw that she had long black wavy hair and was wearing sunglasses. She looked very fashionable. Although her voice and figure looked a little familiar, Li Yundong couldn't remember who she was for a moment. At this time, the woman took off her sunglasses and waved at Li Yundong with a smile. She said loudly, "Hey, don't you recognize me?" When Li Yundong saw this, he immediately laughed. Wasn't this the tour guide that he had met in Tibet and Shiyuan Temple before? He walked over with a smile and said, "It's you. I was wondering who it was." Lu Xia, the tour guide, saw that Li Yundong had recognized her, so she put on her sunglasses again. She said with a smile, "Why did you come to Tibet? Why are you alone? Where's your car? Did it break down?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "I don't have a car." Lu Xia suddenly understood. I almost forgot. The last time I saw you, you were running like a wild horse. I almost couldn't catch up with you." Li Yundong smiled and changed the topic. "Did you bring a group out again this time?" After talking with Li Yundong for a while in Shiyuan Temple, Lu Xia's vigilance and hostility towards him had decreased a lot. At this time, when she suddenly saw Li Yundong in Tibet, she was so surprised that she temporarily stopped the car and chatted with him enthusiastically. Lu Xia said with a smile, "Yes, this time I led the team. I just took the tourists around the pastoral area next to Lhasa. Now I'm going back. What about you? Where are you going? Can I give you a ride?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "There's no need for that. I'll walk there myself." Seeing that Li Yundong had rejected her, Lu Xia was a little disappointed, but she still said with a smile, "Well, why are you running again? Hey, since I've been a tour guide, I've seen a lot of people, but I've never seen someone like you. You don't want to take a car, but you have to use your legs. Are you Superman?" As she spoke, the car behind her suddenly honked. It was the driver urging Lu Xia to get in the car quickly. Lu Xia immediately asked Li Yundong, "Are you really not going to get in the car?" Li Yundong shook his head with a smile, but he immediately seemed to think of something. He asked, "By the way, do you know where Master Erdini lives?" Lu Xia was stunned. "Master Erdini? You don't mean one of the 3 living Buddhas of Tibet, do you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It seems to be him." Lu Xia asked with a strange expression, "Why are you looking for him?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "It's just a small matter. Can you tell me where he is?" Lu Xia rolled her eyes and smiled cunningly. "Okay, but you have to get in the car. I can't explain it to you in a short time. When the time comes, I can be a tour guide and take you there." Li Yundong laughed and said, "I'm penniless. I don't have the money to pay the tour guide fee." Lu Xia waved her hand generously and said, "Don't worry. We've met several times. It's fate. I won't charge you a tour guide fee. Hurry up and get in the car. A car of people is waiting for you." Seeing the other party's kind invitation, Li Yundong no longer pretended to be unreasonable. He nodded with a smile and said, "Well, I owe you a favor." Lu Xia was overjoyed. "That's a deal. I'll take you to the beautiful Lhasa city later." Li Yundong got in the car with Lu Xia with a smile, only to see that the tourists in the car were looking at him curiously, as if they wanted to see what the man who had made the tour guide Lu Xia suddenly stop the car and rush out looked like. When they saw that Li Yundong was handsome and dignified, they immediately looked at Lu Xia ambiguously. Lu Xia blushed under these gazes. She coughed awkwardly and said to Li Yundong, "Go to the back and sit down. We'll be in Lhasa soon." However, Li Yundong didn't seem to feel these gazes. He nodded lightly, walked straight to the back seat and sat down. Lu Xia saw that Li Yundong was calm, as if he hadn't been affected at all. She was a little disappointed and curious. She couldn't help but look down at herself and think to herself, "Who on earth is this guy? Is he pretending to be so calm, or does he really not care about anything?" Lu Xia had seen Li Yundong several times, and had seen some incredible things about him. It was impossible for Li Yundong not to leave a deep impression on her. Sometimes, she would even privately speculate with her close friends about who Li Yundong was, why he was so mysterious, and why he could do so many incredible things. These questions had been entangled in Lu Xia's heart for a long time. This time, when she met Li Yundong again, she suddenly had a feeling that it was a small world. It seemed that she was destined to meet such a magical man again and again. Lu Xia let her imagination run wild for a while, then expelled the distracting thoughts from her mind again. She calmed down and continued to explain the customs of Tibet to the tourists along the way. About half an hour later, the bus finally drove into the downtown area of Lhasa. When the bus stopped, the tourists got off in a hubbub. Li Yundong waited for everyone to get off before he got off at a leisurely pace. As soon as he got off, Li Yundong saw the tour guide Lu Xia standing at the door of the car. She smiled at him and said, "We're here. Wait for me in the hall. I'll go back and take care of it." After that, without waiting for Li Yundong's reply, she quickly went through and got into the hotel. Li Yundong let out a cry. Before he could say, "You don't need to dress up," Lu Xia had already run out of sight. It was not until half an hour later that Lu Xia hurried out of the hotel. When she saw Li Yundong at the door, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief. She patted her chest and said with a smile, "Why are you still here? Didn't I ask you to wait in the hall? I looked around just now, but I didn't see you. I thought you were impatient and left." Li Yundong saw that although Lu Xia was still wearing a pair of big sunglasses, she had taken off the down jacket that covered her curves and put on a hand-knitted brown plaid sweater. She was wearing a pair of jeans that wrapped tightly around her slender legs and showed off her beautiful figure. Li Yundong noticed that Lu Xia had even deliberately put on crystal lip gloss. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "I'm just leading the way. Do you need to change your clothes?" Lu Xia took off the sunglasses on the bridge of her nose and giggled. "You can't entertain distinguished guests casually. Let's go. I'll take you to Lhasa." Li Yundong hurriedly said, "I don't have time to go shopping. Just tell me where Master Erdini is. I'll go find him myself." Lu Xia immediately giggled. "Don't be silly. You won't be able to see him. Master Erdini lives in Potala Palace. Ordinary people can't see people like him." Li Yundong smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about that. Just take me there." Lu Xia looked at Li Yundong strangely and said, "Well, since you insist. But Lhasa is really beautiful. Don't you want to look around? Don't worry. I won't take you to the store and force you to buy things." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's useless for you to take me there, because I—" Before Li Yundong could finish speaking, Lu Xia said in unison, "You have no money, right?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed with Lu Xia. Lu Xia giggled, pushed the sunglasses back on the bridge of her nose and said, "Let's go. I'll take you to Potala Palace." Although the two of them had met a few times before, most of them had not said a few words. But this time, they seemed to have a very agreeable conversation. As a tour guide, Lu Xia was very eloquent and was very good at observing people's expressions. In addition, she enthusiastically introduced the scenic spots, customs, and cultural history of Lhasa along the way. As they walked to the Jokhang Temple near Potala Palace. As soon as they walked into the bustling Jokhang Temple, they saw a sea of people on the street. Countless Tibetans were crowded on the street, looking in one direction, as if they were waiting for someone to come. Li Yundong was stunned and asked curiously, "What are they doing?" Lu Xia stood on tiptoe, put her hand on her forehead, and looked into the distance seriously. Suddenly she said in surprise and excitement, "Oh, we're so lucky. We actually met Guardian Dance parading the street. This is a rare sight." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Guardian Dance?" As he spoke, he also raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw a group of people walking in the distance on the street, with a strong Tibetan Buddhist atmosphere. Some of the people in the group were holding musical instruments and walking while playing, while others were wearing all kinds of ghost masks and dancing while walking. Among the group of people, there were a few strong young men with bare upper bodies carrying a high platform. On the high platform sat a well-dressed woman. Wherever the woman was carried, the Tibetans would bow down devoutly like waves. Li Yundong was very far away. At a glance, he saw that although the woman was also wearing an exaggerated ghost mask, her figure seemed a little familiar. Just as he was feeling a little strange in his heart, he heard Lu Xia say excitedly, "Oh, it's Bonda Lam traveling. It turns out that the true God is traveling." It's rare, it's too rare. My condition is really not good. I went home very late, and have been taking medicine recently. Thank you for your concern. I owe you an update. I'll make it up tomorrow. Chapter 549. Hearing Lu Xiao's words, Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He thought to himself, Bonda Lam? Wasn't this person Meiduo? Thinking of this, Li Yundong looked at the man more seriously. Watch net. 7K. OM. At this time, the most prosperous Bakuo street in Lhasa was crowded with people. Countless Tibetans crawled down like waves, so that people in the distance could see the believers who were dancing the Guardian dance more clearly. They saw a group of people walking at the front wearing colorful Tibetan clothes. On their heads were huge masks made of clay and wood and painted with the appearance of ghosts and gods. At the top of the masks was a snow-white hatta. At a glance, Li Yundong saw that these masks, which were painted with pure gold and fine powder, were exquisitely made. Some were peaceful, some were fierce, and some were ugly and ferocious with fangs. They were decorated with skulls, which gave a strong and deep impression. The believers were wearing wide-sleeved robes with gorgeous patterns and colorful ribbons. The front and back of the robes were painted with human faces and skulls. On their left and right sides were lamas holding conchas. Some of these lamas were carrying the conchas in front, and some were blowing them as they walked behind them. The sound of the conchas was very intimidating and made people feel respect. When the crowd got closer, Li Yundong saw that the woman who was being carried at the highest point had a high bun on her head. There was a bright crown on the bun, and there were big rings on her ears. She was wearing a mask on her face, so her face could not be seen clearly. The mask depicted the appearance of a beautiful woman, but she had 3 slender eyes, which were lifelike and seemed to show kindness in her eyes. The woman was wearing a white coat, a red robe, and red boots. She was sitting on the lotus seat on the high platform, holding a long arrow with a white pole in her right hand, and a bowl full of jewels in her left hand. In the sound of the chanting, she really had the majesty of a true god. Lu Xia, who was watching from one side, was fascinated. She couldn't help but sigh and say, "What a rare thing. Isn't the Tibetan Auspicious Mother Fantasy Festival on the 10th of October? Why did you come out today?" Out of curiosity, she took the initiative to pull a Tibetan next to her, and quickly asked him in Tibetan. After the Tibetan answered a few friendly words, Lu Xia suddenly understood. She pulled Li Yundong excitedly and said, "Hey, you're lucky." As soon as he arrived, he saw this grand celebration that was rarely seen in 100 years. He heard that the living Buddha had found the reincarnation of Bonda Lam. So there was a guardian dance, and the auspicious Heavenly Mother traveling. "Quick, kneel down with me." Bakuo Street was the most prosperous commercial pedestrian street in Tibet, and it was also the most famous holy street. Because it was built around the Jokhang Temple in Tibet, it passed through the Potala Palace, Yawang Mountain, and the Jokhang Temple, so it was named Bakuo Street. In Tibetan, Bakuo meant the middle passage and the middle circle. Every day, countless believers came here and made a pilgrimage around Bakuo Street. It seemed that they had heard the news of Bonda Lam's trip, so there were a lot of Tibetan believers who came that day. There were Tibetans in white robes who had come from the northern pastoral area, Tibetans from the Kangba Mountain, and Tibetans who lived in Bakuo Street dressed in bright and luxurious clothes. When they gathered together, it was originally noisy and crowded, but wherever Bonda Lam went, the tide lowered, and the sound of people immediately disappeared. The originally bustling Bakuo Street became quieter and quieter. Only the majestic sound of the Dharma echoed and soared into the sky. Because most of the Tibetans were kneeling on the ground, many tourists who came to Bakuo Street also knelt on the ground. Lu Xia was even more so. After she knelt down, she was about to crawl on the ground, but when she turned her head, she saw that Li Jiandong was still standing in the same place, looking up at Bonda Lam, as if he was in a daze. Lu Xia was very anxious. She quickly pulled Li Yundong's hand and said, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't look at Bonda Lam directly, or it will be regarded as an offense." But Li Yundong didn't seem to hear what she said. His eyes were still fixed on Bonda Lam, who was sitting on the lotus throne. At this time, Li Yundong had confirmed that the person sitting on the lotus throne was the innocent Tibetan girl he knew, Meiduo. At this moment, Li Yundong felt as if he had been separated from her for a lifetime. Has the Meiduo who used to surround me, smile sweetly and call me Han brother, now become a high and mighty auspicious goddess? The Meiduo who had boldly expressed her love to me in the moonlight, and was rejected by me, then cried like a pear blossom in the rain. Is she now wearing a divine robe and sitting high on the lotus throne? Li Yundong suddenly sighed in his heart and thought to himself, I've been looking for her thousands of times, but when I suddenly come back, she is in a high and lonely place. That innocent, lovely, simple, and kind Meiduo, what kind of expression would she have under the mask of Bonda Lam? Was it sadness? Joy? Happiness? Sadness? Li Yundong couldn't help but worry. He thought to himself, it should have been Zhou Qin who was sitting here. But if it was really Zhou Qin, not to mention that she wouldn't agree, I wouldn't agree either. But, Zhou Qin can't be this Bonda Lam, so why must Meiduo take it? Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but shout, Meiduo! At this time, the entire Bakuo street was extremely quiet. Li Yundong's shout immediately caused everyone to raise their heads and look at him. Next to the lamas who were protecting and dancing, all the living beings on both sides of the street were prostrating. Only Li Yundong stood upright and shouted at Bonda Lam, who was sitting on the lotus throne. The scene in front of them shocked everyone. Even Lu Xia, who was next to them, was scared silly. She was afraid that the angry Tibetans would rush up and tear them to pieces in the next moment. Bonda Lam, who was sitting on the lotus throne, trembled all over. Her body trembled slightly, and she slowly turned her head. Her eyes followed the sound in disbelief. Through Bonda Lam's mask, Meiduo saw Li Yundong standing proudly in the crowd, like a crane standing in a flock of chickens. Suddenly, there was a loud bang in her mind, and an excited voice shouted loudly in her mind, He's here, he's here. At this moment, Meiduo subconsciously reached out to her face and wanted to lift the mask. She shouted at Li Yundong in surprise, Brother Han. But as soon as Meiduo's hand touched her mask and lifted it halfway, the prayer wheel she had hidden in her arms suddenly buzzed. Meiduo's body trembled fiercely. Her originally excited mood suddenly cooled down, and a sad voice kept shouting in her mind, So what if he's here? So what? Meiduo's body stiffened little by little, and her hand, which was holding the mask, froze in midair. Only half of her jade-like face and her rosy cherry mouth were exposed. Li Yundong saw Meiduo looking at him blankly through Bonda Lam's mask. Her eyes slowly changed from surprise and excitement to sadness and sorrow, and finally became as cold as ash. Her red lips under the mask gently moved to him. Although Li Yundong didn't hear what she was saying, he could clearly tell from the movement of her lips that she had said 4 words silently, Brother Han. At this moment, Li Yundong and Meiduo looked at each other in silence. The distance between them was less than 5 meters, but they seemed to be as far apart as the distance between heaven and earth. Time stopped and space froze. The originally flowing Bakuo street instantly turned into a Tonka painting. Li Yundong stared at Meiduo blankly. He wanted to shout Meiduo's name, pull her down from the lotus throne, and let her become the carefree and happy Meiduo again. But he wanted to reach out his hand, but he didn't know where to start. More importantly, if Meiduo was pulled down by him, what about Zhou Qin's real body? What should she do? But was he going to sacrifice Meiduo for Zhou Qin? Li Yundong was struggling in his heart. Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly saw a crystal teardrop rolling down Meiduo's snow-white cheek to the corner of her mouth. At this time, Meiduo no longer hesitated. She raised her hand to wipe away her tears, and took the opportunity to put down her mask again, covering her snow-white and pretty face under the mask of Bonda Lam. Meiduo said a few words in Tibetan to the believers of the Guardian dance, and then these people began to move slowly again. Li Yundong watched helplessly as Meiduo passed in front of him. Behind her was another image of Bonda Lam, the image of Tsing Lam. The red hair on Tsing Lam's head was vertical, decorated with 5 skulls, a half-moon, and peacock feathers. There was a lion on her right ear, a snake on her left ear, and an account book specially recorded the evil deeds of evil people hung from her waist. She held a skull stick in her left hand, and a skull bowl filled with blood in her right. She looked ferocious, terrifying, cold, and ruthless. Li Yundong's body suddenly trembled. He couldn't help but shout, "Meiduo, do you really want to be this Bonda lamb? Answer me. If you don't want to, I'll take you away." Li Yundong's shout immediately caused an uproar among the Tibetans who understood Chinese. Lu Xia was almost frightened to the ground by Li Yundong. She groaned in a trembling voice, "Oh my God, what's wrong with this guy?" Meiduo, who was sitting on the lotus throne, trembled again. She slowly turned around and looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. Li Yundong saw that when Meiduo turned around, half of her face was covered with a white mask, and the other half with a cyan mask. One half symbolized the terrifying and ferocious Tsing lamb, while the other half symbolized the kind and beautiful Bai lamb. It was as if a living person had been split in half. After looking at Li Yundong in a daze for a while, she gently said a few words in Tibetan to a believer beside her. The believer looked at Li Yundong strangely and said to him in stiff Chinese, "Bonda Lam said that she is very good, and that you don't have to worry. Her compatriots need her. In addition, she said that she doesn't know you and asked you to go back." Li Yundong was stunned and thought to himself, Meiduo's words are contradictory. Does she really not want to leave? After saying this, Meiduo said a few words to the believers coldly. The believers of the guardian dance continued to walk forward. This time, Li Yundong didn't say anything to stop them. He just watched Meiduo's figure disappear little by little, and the image of Tsing Lam also slowly disappeared in Bakuo Street. Chapter 550. It was not until the Guardian Dance team had gone far away that Bakuo Street regained its liveliness. However, many Tibetans still looked at Li Yundong strangely, whispering and pointing at him secretly. Go to the internet. 7K. OM. Lu Xia finally couldn't stand it anymore. She pulled Li Yundong to a corner and said almost frantically, "What were you doing just now? Are you crazy? Do you know who that is? That's Bonda Lam, the auspicious goddess, the reincarnated true god certified by the living Buddha. How dare you offend her like this? Aren't you afraid that these believers will tear you to pieces?" Li Yundong had stayed in the spirit space for tens of thousands of years. He thought that he had seen through the joys and sorrows of the human world, as well as the vicissitudes of the world. However, he hadn't expected that when things came to this point, he would still feel melancholy and look bleak. Li Yundong sighed softly and said, "I only know that she is Meiduo. Bonda Lam. I don't care." Lu Xia said frantically, "What? You don't care? Do you know how terrifying the Tibetans are when they go crazy? Do you know how fanatical the Tibetan believers are? If you had offended the public just now, I'm afraid that you would have been crushed into pieces in an instant. Yes, I know that you are definitely not an ordinary person. Even if you can run away, what about me?" Li Yundong didn't seem to hear her words. He just sighed softly and said, "That's Meiduo. How could she become Bonda Lam?" Lu Xia said angrily, "Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't keep calling me Meiduo." "Hey Meiduo. Why does it sound a little familiar? Hey, which Meiduo are you talking about? There are many Tibetan girls named Meiduo." Li Yundong smiled bitterly. He shook his head and said to Lu Xia, "Who else? She's the Meiduo we met together." Lu Xia was stunned. She asked tentatively, "Is it the Meiduo who loves to sing?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "Yes, but I think I won't be able to hear her sing in the future." Lu Xia opened her mouth wide and said, "What? Meiduo is Bonda Lam? Are you kidding me? I talked to Bonda Lam? God, I heard that anyone who has seen Bonda Lam's true body will die. I won't die, right?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No. Only when Tsing Lam decides to die with someone will she show her real body and drag the enemy to hell with her. Normally, you wouldn't be like this when you see her." Only then did Lu Xia feel relieved. She patted her chest and breathed a sigh of relief. That's good, but she soon asked curiously, but how do you know all this? He was silent for a while and said, let's go to Potala Palace. I'm going to find Master Erdini. Lu Xiaoxing muttered, it's still a question whether I can see him or not. Seeing Li Yundong looking at her, she immediately smiled and said, okay, I'll take you there. Anyway, don't blame me if you can't see him. Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything else. He led the way out of the alley and into the crowded Bakuo street. Lu Xia shook her head, sighed helplessly, and chased after him. In order to spend more time with Li Yundong, Lu Xia deliberately took Li Yundong to take a big detour from Bakuo Street. Along the way, they passed by the gate of the Jiakhang Temple, then circled around the Jiakhang Temple, Yawang Mountain, and the Jiakhang Temple. Finally, they walked to Potala Palace. Li Yundong saw it and knew Lu Xia's intentions. He didn't say anything, but just listened to Lu Xia's lively introduction of these famous Buddhist attractions while looking at the surrounding scenery. Along the way, Li Yundong passed by the Princess Willow in front of the Jiakhang Temple, and then passed through the prayer street. Under the low eaves, there was a long row of golden prayer wheels. Countless Tibetan believers were holding the golden prayer wheel in one hand, and the other hand was turning the large prayer wheel on the wall in turn as they walked. They were extremely devout. When the two of them arrived at the foot of Potala Palace, it was already afternoon. Li Yundong looked up and saw that Potala Palace was sitting firmly between heaven and earth. It was built against the mountain, and the buildings overlapped. The palace was lofty and majestic, as if it had come out of the sky and pierced through the sky. From afar, Li Yundong could see the solid and thick white granite walls, the white agate grass wall collar, the resplendent golden roof, and the huge gilt vases, Buddhist statues, and prayer flags with strong decorative effects. The contrast between the three colors of red, white, and yellow made people feel a sense of awe at first glance. Lu Xia looked at the magnificent Potala Palace with awe in her eyes. She couldn't help putting her palms together and saying, every time I come here, I feel that this place is particularly sacred. There seems to be an incredible power around me. Li Yundong glanced around and saw countless believers prostrating themselves on the ground along the way. They knelt down every 3 steps and slowly walked along the mountain road to the palace of Potala Palace to worship, like a gray river slowly flowing up the mountain. Li Yundong sighed and said, the power of hundreds of years of worship has gathered here, so of course it's sacred. However, it's a pity that Songzon Gampo disrespected God and built 1,000 palaces and houses in Potala Palace. As a result, he provoked the divine tribulation. If it weren't for the fact that the divine tribulation had once dispersed the power of faith condensed in Potala Palace, the power condensed in Potala Palace would have been much stronger now. Lu Xia couldn't help but ask curiously, hey, what are you talking about? Songzon Gampo disrespected God? What provoked the divine tribulation? Why don't I know about this? Li Yundong looked at the magnificent and majestic Potala Palace, and suddenly felt a sense of vicissitudes of history in his heart. He sighed and said, back then, in order to celebrate his marriage with Princess Chizuan of Nepal, and boast about it to future generations, Songzon Gampo built as many as 999 palaces here. Lu Xia said curiously, I know this, but what does it have to do with the divine tribulation? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, then do you know why there are only more than 900 palaces and houses in the Forbidden City of the Forbidden City? Lu Xia let out an ah and suddenly understood. Ah, I understand. The Forbidden City did this in order to avoid angering the God of Heaven, by building 1,000 palaces and houses in the Jade Emperor's heavenly palace, right? Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, yes, that's right. Lu Xia asked in confusion, but didn't you just say that Songzon Gampo only built 999 palaces? It means that he still respected God. Li Yundong shook his head and said, unfortunately, he also built an extra cultivation palace. In total, there are exactly 1,000 of them. Lu Xia said in surprise, ah, why did he build this cultivation palace? There are so many houses. Which one can't be used for cultivation? Li Yundong sighed and said, greed is insatiable. Songzang Gampo thought that he was the reincarnation of Guanyin Bodhisattva, so he specially built a Guanyin cultivation room for himself. As a result, the Padala Palace, which had 1,000 palaces, provoked the heavenly thunder. The palace was destroyed and burned by the heavenly thunder, and the Tubo dynasty established by Songzang Gampo was later destroyed. This is the result of not respecting God. Hearing this, Lu Xia laughed and said, what you said is quite lively, but it's just a legend. It's superstition and can't be trusted. Li Yundong shook his head and said seriously to Lu Xia, then why has the Forbidden City, which only has more than 900 palaces and houses, not been destroyed so far? Lu Xia said, this has something to do with the Qing dynasty setting the capital of Beijing and the subsequent war, right? Li Yundong pointed to the sky and said, God has eyes, and people should be afraid. When people don't know how to respect God, then God will send down heavenly tribulation to punish all living beings. Lu Xia was stunned by Li Yundong's words. She subconsciously looked up at the sky and saw that there seemed to be a pair of eyes staring at her in the gray sky, and the pressure was serious. Lu Xia shivered. She quickly put her palms together and said, Amitba, I'm very respectful. Don't punish me. Li Yundong smiled and was about to speak when he suddenly heard a sneer from the side. Feudal superstition. Li Yundong and Lu Xia turned their heads and saw a fashionable but feminine boy holding a fashionable and beautiful girl in his arms, looking at them with sarcasm. Lu Xia said unhappily, Comrade, who are you talking about? The boy laughed and said, Comrade? Are you kidding me? What era are you in? Lu Xia said with a strange expression, Aren't you a comrade? Only then did the boy realize that there was something wrong with Lu Xia's tone. He said angrily, You're the comrade. Your whole family is comrade. Don't you see that I'm a man? Lu Xia covered her mouth in surprise and said, Ah, you're a man? I didn't see it. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. If you were really a comrade, I should have called you a lesbian just now. Lu Xia was a tour guide, so she was naturally sharp-tongued. With a few words, the boy choked and rolled his eyes. Li Yundong just glanced at him lightly, as if he disdained to argue with such a boy. He smiled and said to Lu Xia, Forget it. We have different ideas, so there's nothing to say. Is Master Erdini here? Lu Xia took advantage of him verbally. As if she had won, she turned her head and said to Li Yundong with a smile, Yes, but I don't know which palace he lives in. Li Yundong smiled and said, Thank you for bringing me here. I'll go in and find Master Erdini later. Lu Xia was disappointed. Don't you need me to take you in? Aren't you afraid of getting lost inside? It's very big inside. Li Yundong said with a smile, It's okay. I can ask someone. As soon as he finished speaking, the boy next to him couldn't help laughing. His laughter was full of sarcasm and ridicule. He laughed loudly and said, I'm dying of laughter. Ask someone? Hey, country bumpkin, do you know who Master Erdini is? Do you think you can see him whenever you want? Even people like me can't see him. Who do you think you are? Before Li Yundong could finish his words, he saw a llama in a yellow robe and a high crown coming over. He put his palms together and said with a smile, Shimranli, we meet again. Chapter 551. At a glance, Li Yundong saw that the llama standing in front of him was burly and rugged. It was Dorji Tenzin, whom he had gotten to know through fighting. He immediately laughed, formed a palm with one hand, and returned the salute with a Taoist salute. It turns out to be Master Dorji Tenzin. Li Yundong looked at Dorji Tenzin up and down, and saw that he was only wearing a thin yellow coat in this extremely cold winter weather. Even half of his muscular arm was exposed outside, but he didn't feel cold at all. Go to see. 7K. OM. Especially when Li Yundong saw the light in Dorji Tenzin's eyes. It was obvious that his cultivation had improved a lot compared to the last time he had met him. He immediately laughed and said, I haven't seen you for some time. You've become a lot stronger. Dorji Tenzin was also looking at Li Yundong seriously. Different from the last time he had met Li Yundong, Li Yundong was no longer as sharp and aggressive as before. At this time, Li Yundong had gradually restrained his aura and hidden his domineering aura. It was obvious that his cultivation had begun from the outside to the inside, and he had begun to enter the realm of returning to nature. Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and exclaimed with sincere admiration, "Jinrenli, I haven't seen you for a few months. Your cultivation is really impressive. I thought that I had been enlightened by the great mandala of the living Buddha's fetus realm, and my cultivation had improved a lot. I didn't expect that there would still be a world of difference between me and you. Jinrenli, amazing, you deserve to be a supreme master." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Master, you're too polite. I'm still far from being a supreme master." Dorji Tenzin said with a smile, "Not far, not far. With your current cultivation speed, I'm afraid it won't be long before you reach the supreme master realm." Li Yundong said with a smile, "I'm ashamed. This is exactly why I came here this time. I don't know where Master Erdini is. Can I see him?" Dorji Tenzin laughed and said, "Master has been waiting for you for a long time. Just now, he specially told me to go down the mountain to pick you up." Li Yundong was slightly surprised and said with a smile, "Did Master Erdini know that I was coming? Master's destiny connection is really amazing." At this time, Li Yunyang turned his head and wanted to tell Lu Xia to go back first. But when he looked at her, he saw that she was staring at him with her mouth agape, as if she had seen an alien. Li Yundong was slightly stunned, but he soon understood that his conversation with Dorji Tenzin had obviously scared her. Li Yundong smiled and said gently to Lu Xia, "You can go back first. Thank you for bringing me here. I'll go in with Master Dorji Tenzin later." Lu Xia seemed to wake up from a dream. She exclaimed and said subconsciously, Then aren't you going back to the hotel?" Lu Xia regretted asking this question. Her cheeks were a little red. She thought to herself, "Nonsense. I don't live there. Why should I go back?" Sure enough, Li Yundong shook his head slightly and said, "No. If everything goes well, I'll go back to Tiannan City directly." Lu Xiao's heart skipped a beat and she thought to herself, "Does he live in Tiannan City? Ha, I finally know where this elusive fellow lives. It's not easy." Although Lu Xia was a little reluctant in her heart, she still smiled at Li Yundong and said, "Then I won't send you in. When you see Master Erdini, don't be rude. Don't treat Bonda like. Don't treat Meidua like that. Otherwise, I won't be able to save you." Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't say anything. However, Dorji Tenzin, who was next to him, laughed and said, "It's not certain who will be the one." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. After a polite greeting, they walked side by side along the mountain road to Patala Palace. Lu Xia looked at Li Yundong and Dorji Tenzin's departing figures and felt lost for a moment. But when she glanced around, she saw that the boy who had just ridiculed her was staring at Li Yundong's departing figure with his mouth agape. She immediately became complacent again and said, "Now you know what it means to have eyes but fail to recognize Mount Tai, don't you? Do you think he's like you? You can't see Master Erdini, but he personally sent someone down the mountain to pick you up. Are you dumbfounded? Haha." The boy glared at Lu Xia angrily, but he couldn't refute her directly. He just said angrily, "Why can't I see him but this guy can?" However, the girl next to him advised in a low voice, "Well, if you can't see him, then you can't. He's just an old monk. What's the big deal?" Hearing this, Lu Xia couldn't help but sneer and say, "An old monk? Ha! Do you know who the old monk you're talking about is? He's the living Buddha. If the Tibetans hear what you said, they will beat you so hard that you can't go home and directly throw you into the holy mountain for a sky burial." The girl was shocked and quickly looked around in fear, as if she was afraid that these Tibetans would hear her words. The boy next to her patted her on the back and said sarcastically to Lu Xia, "What are you so proud of? Can you see him? What do you mean by pretending to be a tiger? If you have the ability, you can show me." Lu Xia was a little angry and ashamed, but she soon had an idea. She rolled her eyes and snorted, saying, "Do you think I can't see him? Just you wait. I'll follow behind him. See if I can see him or not. As she said this, she quickly followed behind Li Yundong. The boy was a little tongue-tied. He watched for a while and suddenly jumped up. If she can see him, why can't I? No, I want to go too. As he said this, he also followed. The girl next to him sighed, but she couldn't stop her male companion, so she had no choice but to follow him. Li Yundong and Dorji Tenzin walked side by side. The two of them walked along the wordless stone tablet at the foot of the mountain. They walked all the way to the east gate, where a huge mural was painted. Only then did they arrive at the gate of Patala Palace. Li Yundong looked up and saw that the four majestic Vajras of Buddhism were painted on the mural. From left to right, they were the Vajra of annihilation, the Vajra of fearlessness, the Vajra of elimination, and the Vajra of victory. He saw that the four Vajras were in different postures. They were holding their own powerful magical weapons and looking down at everyone who was going to Patala Palace. Li Yundong didn't even need Qi to feel that the four Vajras were surrounded by a powerful force, guarding the east gate of Patala Palace majestically. In front of this force, Li Yundong seemed to feel that there was an indomitable giant in front of him looking down at him. The difference in strength was so great that Li Yundong was inexplicably surprised. At this moment, Li Yundong suddenly felt a little creeped out. He suddenly remembered that when he had first come to Tibet, he had offended the mountain-protecting divine power in the Kathuo temple. That power had left an extremely deep and strong impression on him. Li Yundong had thought that this power was the peak of the power of faith, but he hadn't expected that when he arrived at the gate of Patala Palace, the pressure and shock that the Vajra had brought him was far greater than before. Li Yundong suddenly thought of when Songzang Gampo had just established Patala Palace. At that time, how strong the power of faith had been. But such power had been easily destroyed by the thunder retribution. It could be seen how terrifying the thunder retribution was. It could be seen how terrifying the heavenly tribulation was. Could cultivators really survive the thunder retribution? Li Yundong clearly felt that his Taoist heart was a little shaken at this moment, as if a crack had appeared in his solid elixir heart. However, Li Yundong's will was as firm as steel. He immediately took a deep breath and focused his eyes. He guarded his dantian with qi, gathered his spirit to the lingtai, and guarded his divine sense tightly. He stepped inside. At this time, Dorji Tenzin couldn't help but praise with a smile. "You really deserve to be Jinren. You're amazing." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "These are the four Vajra statues of our Patala Palace. They have the supreme power of true God's Dharma. In the face of such power, no matter how powerful a cultivator is, he will feel as if he is in the vast world, and that it is difficult for him to defeat heaven. Only the most determined cultivator can muster up the courage to take a step forward and enter Patala Palace. At that time, I stood at the door for 3 days and 3 nights before I finally made up my mind and mustered up the courage to walk in." However, Jinren, you just stayed for a few seconds and immediately returned to normal. Such a firm mind is really admirable. Only then did Li Yundong understand. He smiled slightly and said, "I was just lucky. It's no big deal. But why do I feel that the postures and gestures of the four Vajras are a little strange?" As he spoke, Li Yundong pointed to the brightly colored mural on the inner wall of Patala Palace. There was a picture of an angry Vajra holding a Mahamudra and said, "For example, isn't this the wisdom fist print?" Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "That's right." Li Yundong asked with a puzzled face, "By the way, why did Master Erdini say that I only learned half of the mantra Mahamudra? I followed it. What about you? Did you learn it all?" Dorji Tenzin laughed and said, "Jinren, you have to ask Master Erdini about this." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Speaking of which, I secretly learned the magic of your esoteric sect. I'm really sorry." Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "Jinren is a fated person. You don't have to worry about it. When you see Master Erdini, you will understand." As he spoke, he took Li Yundong through the east courtyard, the White House's porch, the silent perfection hall, the East and West Sunlight Halls, the Maitreya Hall, and other places in the towering Patala Palace. When they arrived at the Sound Copper Hall, Dorji Tenzin finally stopped and said to Li Yundong with a smile, "Jinrenli, wait here for a moment. I'll go and call Master Erdini now." Li Yundong smiled and bowed to Dorji Tenzin. After watching him leave, he looked around curiously. Li Yundong saw that he was in a very spacious hall. There were countless bronze Buddha statues in the hall, and it was a statue of Sakyamuni. Li Yundong saw that the statue of Sakyamuni was holding the Sakyamuni Mudra in its hand. Under the Sakyamuni Mudra were 2 rows of characters, one in Chinese and the other in Tibetan. Li Yundong glanced at it and saw that the row of Chinese characters was written in a strange and jerky way. In the past, Mo san man duobo tuan and fu safu it li shina suna pas safu demo fusher duobo duobo mo fu safu he. With just a glance, Li Yundong felt a little dizzy. Not only was this paragraph of text difficult to understand, but some of the words were even extremely rare. Li Yundong shook his head with a smile and moved his gaze to a statue next to him. He saw that the statue next to it was the fearless Vajra of the 4 great Vajras. This Vajra was holding the Dharma boundary mudra of the Vairocana Buddha. Under the Dharma boundary mudra, there were still 2 rows of words written in Chinese and Tibetan. The Chinese characters were, "In the past, Mo san man duobo tuan en awe luoyu." Li Yundong read it word by word and suddenly smiled bitterly. He thought to himself, "This is better. At least I can see the Dharma boundary in the mantra of 9 words. When I used to use the Vairocana Buddha's mudra, I usually just said the mantra, Dharma boundary. This word is enough. Why is it so long here?" Thinking of this, Li Yundong was suddenly stunned, and a thought flashed through his mind. He suddenly widened his eyes and looked at the row of words in shock. He shouted in his mind, "Master Erdini said that I have only learned half of the mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu. Could it be that the other half of the Kung Fu is in the remaining mantra? Could it be that these are the real complete mantras of the mantra Mahamudra? Well, that's right. This is the complete version of the mantra Mahamudra. It's honest to the old and young. If the children want to learn it, they must be careful not to tie their tongues. Haha." Chapter 552. Li Yundong looked at the Vajra statue in front of him in shock, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. The mantra Mahamudra was actually engraved under the statue? It can't be right. Weren't the people of Tantric Buddhism afraid that someone would steal it and learn it? He turned his head abruptly and looked at the other statues in the hall. There were hundreds of statues here, each of which was holding a Mahamudra. There were 2 rows of words under the statues, one in Chinese and the other in Tibetan. Watch net. 7K. OM. Li Yundong was shocked and doubtful. Regardless of the fact that Master Banda Lam hadn't arrived yet, he began to perform the Mahamudra and recited the mantra incantation of these Mahamudra in a low voice. However, as soon as Li Yundong held the Mahamudra and recited the mantra, he felt that the qi and blood in his body were boiling, as if a huge stone had been thrown into a calm lake, stirring up thousands of huge waves. Especially when he continued to recite, the lake water became more and more boiling, like a pot of boiling water. Especially at the end, Li Yundong felt that the junqi all over his body seemed to have turned into volcanic lava that was about to erupt at any time. In the next second, it would rush into the handprint he was holding. Li Yundong was shocked and immediately released the handprint. In an instant, the aura slowly dissipated. At this moment, he was finally sure that these words were indeed the complete mantra of the mantra Mahamudra. But what puzzled Li Yundong was, why did these mantras take so long? Just now, he had been reciting the incantation for a very long time, as if he was chanting an incantation to release a spell. If he had been in a real fight, he would have been beaten down a dozen times by his opponent while he was reciting the incantation. Moreover, wasn't the Tantric sect's Kung Fu the 6-syllable mantra? How could there be so many mantras? Just as Li Yundong was puzzled, he suddenly heard a burst of laughter behind him. Although the 6-word Buddhist incantation is a secret of our esoteric sect, people often only know the 6-word Buddhist incantation, mani 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 mani. But they don't know that this 6-word Buddhist incantation is actually a reduced mantra. When Li Yundong heard the voice behind him, he turned around in surprise. With his current cultivation, it was absolutely impossible for ordinary people to get within 10 meters of him. But 8 meters behind Li Yundong stood an old man in yellow, a red robe, and a yellow llama hat. The old man's face was full of wrinkles, and his eyebrows were extremely long. He looked at him with bright eyes, which were full of kindness and laughter. With just one glance, Li Yunyang felt that the divine light in the other party's eyes was as unfathomable as the vast sea. He knew that this must be Master Erdini. He turned around, bowed respectfully, and said, "Master Erdini, I've heard a lot about you." Erdini smiled slightly and put his palms together to return the greeting. "You're flattering me. Genuinely, I've heard a lot about you." Li Yundong smiled modestly and said, "Master, how did you know what I was thinking just now?" Li Yunaf Li of him of Li of Li, Li Li as B, as, Li of Li Li Master of me. Since you know what I am thinking, may I ask why there are 2 different versions of the mantra Mahamudra? Li Yundong smiled and said, "In fact, this is the language used by Buddha, also known as the Buddhist language. Only when these Buddhist mantras are completely recited can the Mahamudra exert its full power. But because ordinary people can't use the Buddhist language, or when reciting it, it will be very difficult. Therefore, in order to pass on the mantra Mahamudra, the disciples of Buddha came up with a simplified version of the mantra Mahamudra, which is the 6-word mantra you are using now. But because ordinary people couldn't use the Buddhist language, or because chanting it was very strenuous, the disciples of Buddha came up with a simplified version of the mantra Mahamudra in order to pass down the mantra Mahamudra, which is the 6-syllable mantra you are using now." Li Yundong was suddenly enlightened, but he still asked with a puzzled face, "But Master, I am a Han. Why would you pass on this kind of secret kung fu to an outsider like me?" Li Yundong looked at Li Yundong with deep eyes and said meaningfully, "Because Buddha doesn't discriminate between races." Li Yundong was stunned. "Buddha doesn't discriminate between races? What do you mean?" "But I'm not a member of your esoteric sect," Master Erdini said with a smile. "When I heard Dorji Tenzin talk about you, he praised your cultivation talent. At that time, I just sighed that there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers in the Central Plains, and heroes came forth in large numbers. But when he said that it only took you a few days to learn the mantra Mahamudra, I was immediately shocked by what he said, and I immediately thought of one thing." "Do you know what it is?" Li Yundong asked. "What is it?" Master Erdini smiled meaningfully and said, "I immediately realized that the true God has been reincarnated." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He asked curiously, "Can you make a conclusion based on this alone?" Master Erdini laughed and said, "Genuinely, you are really confused by the situation. People with great strength can easily carry a heavy load of 1,000 pounds. They must be wondering why most people can't carry it. Because they are talented, and ordinary people can't compare with them. Do you know how long it took for the disciples of Sakyamuni to learn the mantra Mahamudra?" Although Li Yundong had read all the classics, he knew nothing about these secrets that were not recorded in the classics. He asked curiously, "How many years?" Master Erdini raised 3 fingers and smiled without saying a word. Li Yundong said tentatively, 3 days. Master Erdini shook his head and laughed. Li Yundong asked again, 3 months? Master Erdini still shook his head and smiled. Li Yundong was slightly shocked and said, "It can't be 3 years, can it?" Master Erdini laughed and said, "No, it's 30 years. Li Yundong suddenly took a deep breath. 30 years? Is this kung fu so difficult to practice? Master Erdini nodded and said, "Yes, the mantra Mahamudra is extremely difficult to practice. That's why the abbot of Kathuo Temple dared to give you the rare book of the mantra Mahamudra, because he expected that you wouldn't be able to learn it. But he never expected that not only did you learn it, but you also learned the mantra Mahamudra freely in just a few days, as if you had been immersed in it for decades. Do you know what this means?" Li Yundong was silent and his face was solemn. Seeing that he was unwilling to say anything, Master Erdini smiled and said, Jinrenli, you are the reincarnation of a true god. Otherwise, it would be impossible for you to learn the mantra Mahamudra so quickly. Did you feel that these mantra incantations were very familiar just now? When you recited them yourself, you didn't feel any difficulty. Li Yundong couldn't help but nod. He said, but I felt a little slow and not very smooth. Moreover, it took me too long to recite the incantation. In a real fight, I feel that the real mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu is not strong. Master Erdini laughed and said, Jinrenli, do you know how long it takes for the guardian Vajra of our esoteric sect to recite a complete incantation when they learn the complete version of the mantra Mahamudra? This time, Li Yundong stopped guessing. He simply asked, how long? Master Erdini raised a finger and said, a whole 10 years. Because each syllable of these mantras requires a huge amount of jinqi to be recited. Without profound magical power, it is absolutely impossible to recite them completely. Jinrenli, your cultivation is not much higher than that of the guardian Vajra of our esoteric sect, but you can easily recite them. This shows that you are a true god of Buddhism. Apart from that, there is no other explanation. As he spoke, Master Erdini pointed to a Vajra statue next to him and said, Jinrenli, try and see if you can recite this mantra. Li Yundong looked in the direction of his finger and saw that the Vajra was holding the Amitabha Buddha seal. The mantra incantation of this seal was frighteningly long. There were 3 rows of it. At a glance, Li Yundong saw that although these words were difficult to pronounce, when he tried to recite them, although he was a little slow, he was able to recite them fluently. He recited in a low voice, Zwa emo luobo luo yi, namo ali yi mi pi yi, hung tabo duo yi, luo hi di, san shao sembo tuo yi. He you also him mimi di danapiyu, duo sampiyu, duo tilleru duo cd duo dg, duo way 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 dg, duo way. When Li Yundong finished reciting, he felt a layer of sweat all over his body, as if he had exhausted all his strength. Especially when he recited the last syllable, he felt like he was going to die. It was as if he had to use all his strength and jinqi to recite every syllable. Seeing that Li Yundong had finished reciting with great effort, Master Erdini couldn't help laughing. Li Yundong thought that Master Erdini was laughing at his embarrassing appearance after reciting the mantra. He smiled bitterly and said, Master, don't laugh at me. Master Erdini shook his head and said with a smile, Laugh at you? No, I'm just more and more sure that you are definitely the reincarnation of a true god, because you actually know how to break these mantras. As he spoke, Master Erdini walked to the front of the Vajra statue, pointed to the mantra below, and said with a smile, the words on it have no punctuation marks. If you hadn't been born to understand the Buddhist language, it would have been impossible for you to know where to start. But just now, every broken position happened to be a mantra syllable. Moreover, this is the most difficult mantra in all the Mahamudra Kung Fu. Even I may not be able to recite it in one breath, but you can. Jinrenli, are you still unwilling to admit it? Li Yundong was silent for a long time before he slowly said, Even if I am, what does that have to do with your esoteric sect? Master Erdini clapped his hands and laughed. Good, you finally admit it. It has something to do with me. Of course it has something to do with me. As he said this, he bowed down respectfully, prostrated himself on the ground, and said, I pay my respects to Buddha. Li Yundong quickly helped him up, shook his head and said, Master, you're too polite. I'm ashamed. You are the reincarnation of the living Buddha. It should be me who salutes you. However, I only know that I have the immovable wisdom king's Dharmakaya, not the Buddha's Dharmakaya. After getting up, Master Erdini said with a smile, The immovable wisdom king is the incarnation of Buddha's anger. It is used to subdue demons and devils. It has great magical power. No wonder you can recite these mantras so easily, Living Buddha. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Don't call me Living Buddha. It sounds weird. Moreover, in front of you, how dare I call myself Living Buddha?" However, Master Erdini shook his head, took a step back, and said seriously, "That won't do." Li Yundong also said seriously, "Master Erdini, I am a cultivator of Taoism. Even if I am the reincarnation of Wisdom King, I have another cultivation and destiny in this life. It's too absurd for you to call me Living Buddha. You will be laughed at." Master Erdini thought for a moment and said, "Well then. However, how can you call me Tianzuan? I'll call you Tianzuan. You don't have to call me by your name, because you are the unique Tianzuan in this world." Seeing that he couldn't dissuade him, Li Yundong had no choice but to change the topic and said, "Master Erdini, I heard you say that there are 9 levels of seals in Amitabha. May I ask what they are? Can you teach me?" Master Erdini smiled slightly and said, "If Tianzuan wants to learn, of course I can help." Li Yundong was overjoyed when he heard this. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a thump in the distance, followed by a cry. He was immediately shocked, and turned his head abruptly. His eyes were as sharp as lightning, as he looked in the direction of the sound. He shouted sternly, "Who is it? Sorry I went out today, so it's even later." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.